Buongiorno a tutti, siamo lieti di darvi il benvenuto in questa splendida location e vi ringraziamo per aver accolto il nostro invito a partecipare a questo evento. In occasione del decennale dell'Autorità di regolazione dei trasporti abbiamo realizzato un video istituzionale che prego di mandare in onda. Grazie.
La storia di ART, Autorità di regolazione dei trasporti, inizia con l'obiettivo di accompagnare la liberalizzazione del settore dei trasporti. Ogni volta che salgo su un treno per raggiungere una città lontana, penso a come erano diversi un tempo i miei viaggi. Quando si incominciava appena a intravedere sul mercato la possibilità di una scelta che nel tempo è diventata concreta anche grazie ad ART. Oggi, per raggiungere un luogo lontano con un treno ad alta velocità, posso scegliere tra più operatori in concorrenza tra loro.
Abbiamo lavorato molto per fissare le nuove regole.
Sì, perché concorrenza vuol dire migliore qualità del servizio a costi più contenuti.
Ho sempre viaggiato in autostrada, con i miei genitori prima e con la mia famiglia ora. E ricordo bene le lamentele di mio padre, quando i prezzi al casello salivano in maniera poco comprensibile.
Nel settore autostradale ART ha introdotto un sistema tariffario innovativo che pone un limite agli aumenti indiscriminati dei pedaggi e assicura una maggiore efficienza nella gestione delle autostrade,
garantendo, fra l'altro, che i guadagni dei concessionari siano equi e correlati agli investimenti effettivamente realizzati.
Anche nelle aree di servizio e sosta, le nostre misure di regolazione consentono agli utenti di usufruire di servizi più competitivi, non solo nei punti di ristoro e sosta, ma ad esempio anche per la ricarica elettrica dei veicoli.
Tra le molte funzioni dell'autorità, non sapevo che per il settore aereo ART stabilisse le regole per determinare i corrispettivi che le compagnie aeree devono pagare alle società che gestiscono gli scali. E questo mi garantisce una migliore qualità dei servizi a costi sostenibili ogni volta che sono in un aeroporto.
Le misure che abbiamo introdotto incentivano i gestori aeroportuali a garantire un miglioramento continuo della qualità dei servizi ai passeggeri e la realizzazione degli investimenti programmati.
E vigiliamo sulla corretta applicazione delle nostre misure di regolazione.
Lo sapevi che quando sali su un autobus, un tram o una metro, ART è a fianco del tuo comune e della tua regione? Infatti l'autorità li supporta per garantire qualità, efficienza e trasparenza nelle procedure di affidamento dei servizi.
Lavoriamo affinché l'offerta di servizi di trasporto pubblico locale diventi sempre più coerente con le esigenze di mobilità dell'utenza anche pendolare.
Il treno alta velocità. L'Unione Europea ha stabilito una serie di diritti di tutti i passeggeri che viaggiano su treni, autobus e navi. E grazie all'autorità, ognuno di noi quando è in viaggio è sicuro che quei diritti verranno rispettati. ART è anche la prima autorità in Europa a proporre il contenuto minimo di questi diritti garantiti ai passeggeri.
Offriamo agli utenti la possibilità di risolvere le controversie con gli operatori dei servizi di trasporto senza dover ricorrere alle vie legali. Con la conciliazione si risparmia tempo e denaro.
L'autorità è particolarmente attenta alla tutela dei diritti delle persone con disabilità e in generale a mobilità ridotta.
ART è al lavoro per assicurare il continuo miglioramento dei servizi di trasporto e per trasformare il nostro viaggio in una nuova esperienza, sempre più accompagnata da qualità, diritti e tutele.
Di strada ne abbiamo fatta, ma il viaggio insieme è ancora lungo.
Ecco che cos'è ART. Un'autorità fatta di persone che da anni lavora con passione al servizio dei cittadini a garanzia di un sistema dei trasporti sempre più concorrenziale, efficiente, sostenibile e vicino agli utenti.
ART regola il sistema dei trasporti per una mobilità efficiente.
Diamo la parola al Presidente dell'Autorità di regolazione dei trasporti, Nicola Zaccheo.
Buongiorno, buongiorno a tutti, benvenuti al convegno celebrativo dei primi 10 anni dell'Autorità di regolazione dei trasporti in questa meravigliosa cornice del Castello del Valentino. Ringrazio e saluto tutti i presenti e tutti i partecipanti, in particolare ringrazio il Commissario europeo per l'economia Paolo Gentiloni per un videomessaggio che vedremo tra un po'. Ringrazio il Sindaco di Torino Stefano Lorusso, l'assessore ai trasporti della Regione Piemonte Marco Gabusi e il Rettore del Politecnico di Torino Guido Saracco. Ringrazio tutti i colleghi che daranno vita anche ai 2 panel che poi seguiranno. Let me thank very much all the colleagues and friends from the other countries accepting our invitation and welcome in Turin for the 10th anniversary of the Transport Regulation Authority. ART è stata istituita con l'articolo 37 del decreto legge 201 del 6 dicembre 2011, rubricato liberalizzazione del settore dei trasporti, ma il primo consiglio dell'autorità, presieduto da Andrea Camanzi, che è qui oggi, che saluto con affetto e ringrazio per essere qui presente, dicevo che il primo consiglio si riuniva il 17 settembre del 2013. Quindi in occasione del decennale abbiamo deciso di realizzare il video che avete appena visto per cercare di raccontare le tantissime attività e le numerose funzioni nelle quali siamo quotidianamente coinvolti. Il mondo dei trasporti, come potete immaginare, è veramente variegato, veramente complesso e spero che con questo video siamo riusciti a sintetizzare e a cercare di far meglio comprendere quello che noi facciamo quotidianamente. Gli attori che avete visto nel video sono tutti dipendenti dell'autorità, quindi ne approfitto per ringraziare tutte le donne e tutti gli uomini che lavorano in ART per il loro preziosissimo impegno quotidiano. In questi 10 anni in autorità abbiamo maturato delle competenze e delle professionalità elevatissime, abbiamo raggiunto dei traguardi importanti, cercando e riuscendoci anche di garantire l'equilibrio degli interessi di tutti gli stakeholder coinvolti, sia pubblici che privati. Il 10° anniversario ci consente di stilare un primo bilancio sulle attività svolte e soprattutto sugli effetti che la regolazione di ART ha avuto nei mercati di riferimento. Guardando ai principali risultati raggiunti in questo primo ciclo di regolazione, emerge forte ed evidente la centralità che l'autorità riveste sia nell'attuazione della politica europea dei trasporti che nell'accompagnamento del processo di sviluppo economico e di innovazione tecnologica nel mondo dei trasporti attraverso una regolazione economica indipendente, sostenibile e sempre vicino all'utenza. La regolazione economica dell'intero settore ex ante e di vigilanza ex post ha fortemente contribuito all'apertura dei mercati e al superamento di assetti monopolistici, favorendo l'ingresso di nuovi operatori privati in concorrenza anche con incumbent. Un esempio su tutti è il trasporto ferroviario passeggeri ad alta velocità, nonché ha favorito più trasparenza ed equità nell'accesso alle infrastrutture e negli affidamenti dei servizi di trasporto. Infatti la regolazione di ART è stata determinante nel garantire le condizioni di accesso equo e non discriminatorie alle infrastrutture, una maggiore efficienza delle gestioni, la trasparenza e la competitività per le imprese di trasporti, nel conseguimento anche di migliore qualità dei servizi e contenimento dei costi per gli utenti, imprese e consumatori, senza dimenticare la tutela dei diritti dei passeggeri, tema questo che è centrale, attorno al quale gravitano molte delle attività dell'autorità. Mi piacerebbe molto elencare i principali risultati che l'autorità ha ottenuto in questi 10 anni nell'esercizio. Ok, grazie. Purtroppo mi piacerebbe fare questa elencazione, però i tempi sono molto contingentati. Alcuni dei nostri ospiti hanno anche altri impegni istituzionali, quindi vi invito però a consultare l'ultima relazione annuale in Parlamento, la prima parte della quale l'abbiamo proprio dedicata a una rassegna dei principali risultati conseguiti in questi anni. Tra l'altro una copia anche della presentazione della relazione annuale vi è stata fornita nella cartellina che è stata distribuita all'ingresso. Guardando al futuro, il regolatore è chiamato ad accompagnare il processo di sviluppo economico e di innovazione tecnologica che interessano l'ambito in cui opera. La terzietà, l'indipendenza, le esperienze maturate negli anni nell'esercizio delle proprie funzioni consentono all'autorità di poter traguardare sempre nuovi obiettivi a tutela dell'utenza e a presidio dell'interesse pubblico. Durante questo convegno dagli autorevolissimi partecipanti emergeranno sicuramente degli spunti di riflessione di cui faremo tesoro nelle nostre attività future. Ringrazio, finisco qui, chiudo questa introduzione, poi alla fine dei due panel poi cercherò di fare anche una sintesi dei lavori. Quindi ringrazio ancora tutti i partecipanti e do inizio al convegno Tendenze recenti e prospettive della regolazione economica indipendente dei trasporti. Grazie.
Grazie signor Presidente. Il Commissario europeo all'economia Paolo Gentiloni ci ha voluto omaggiare inviandoci un suo videomessaggio che prego di trasmettere. Grazie.
Buongiorno a tutti, ringrazio il Presidente Zaccheo per l'invito, saluto i parlamentari, i rappresentanti del Governo e tutti voi. I trasporti sono parte integrante della vita quotidiana di tutti noi. In una società sempre più mobile e interconnessa sono funzionali all'attività economica, alla crescita, allo sviluppo. Dopo la casa e gli alimenti rappresentano la terza voce di spesa nel bilancio delle famiglie e nel sistema dei trasporti trovano concreta attuazione alcune delle libertà fondamentali alla base dell'integrazione europea: la libera circolazione delle persone, delle merci e dei servizi. La politica europea dei trasporti lavora per creare una rete di infrastrutture progressivamente più integrata per facilitare gli scambi, per mantenere condizioni di concorrenza e per garantire i diritti degli utenti. È in realtà una delle politiche comuni più strategiche dell'Unione, non solo perché il settore vale circa il 5% del PIL europeo e perché dà lavoro a oltre 10 milioni di persone, ma perché favorisce la competitività del nostro settore industriale, tema che, come sapete, è più che mai al centro dell'agenda nazionale ed europea. Negli ultimi 10 anni sono stati fatti passi avanti importanti nello sviluppo della rete di trasporti transeuropea e dei corridoi, tra cui il corridoio mediterraneo e quello baltico-adriatico, che interessano l'Italia. Completare questa rete, estenderla anche a paesi confinanti come l'Ucraina della Moldavia, è una delle nostre priorità per i prossimi anni. Il settore sta poi attraversando un periodo di profonda innovazione, un periodo di cambiamento. Le sfide sono molteplici. La sfida digitale, pensiamo all'avvento dell'intelligenza artificiale, all'importanza della cyber security. La sfida della mobilità sostenibile, in un contesto di prezzi dell'energia in calo rispetto ai livelli di un anno fa, ma ancora sopra la media degli ultimi anni. La sfida delle competenze, in un settore in cui la carenza di manodopera qualificata si fa sentire. Sappiamo che per superare queste sfide saranno necessari grossi investimenti e con Next Generation EU, con il PNRR, abbiamo una straordinaria opportunità che può vedere l'Italia protagonista. Circa 70 miliardi delle risorse europee del Next Generation EU sono infatti destinati alla mobilità sostenibile. e di questi la metà sono nel PNRR. Spostare il traffico passeggeri e merci dalla strada alla ferrovia, digitalizzare le reti di trasporto, migliorare i collegamenti ferroviari, specialmente al sud, potenziare il servizio pubblico locale. Ecco, questi sono alcuni dei progetti più importanti nel PNRR. E proviamo a immaginare l'impatto di tutte queste misure in termini di riduzione dei tempi di percorrenza, di nuove opportunità economiche, di rafforzamento della coesione territoriale, di migliore qualità dell'aria e dei servizi per i cittadini. È un treno che l'Italia e l'Europa non possono e non devono perdere. Il decennale dell'Autorità di regolazione dei trasporti offre l'occasione non solo di ricordare i risultati importanti raggiunti, ma anche di aprire una riflessione su come il regolatore può accompagnare il processo di sviluppo e innovazione nel settore dei trasporti, nel segno di una regolazione economica che, come ricorda il Presidente nella sua relazione, sia sempre indipendente, sostenibile e vicina all'utenza. Grazie e buon proseguimento dei lavori.
E cedo la parola al professor Guido Saracco, rettore del Politecnico di Torino. Prego, professore.
Benvenuti al Politecnico di Torino. Qui siamo nati nel 1859, proprio qua, in questo magnifico castello che ci donò lo Stato quando fummo costituiti. E la casa dell'Autorità dei trasporti è al Politecnico di Torino, al Lingotto, nelle nostre strutture, che siamo onorati di donare a questa causa importantissima. La regolazione delle tecnologie sta diventando un tema cruciale. Il commissario Gentiloni ha appena ricordato l'importanza della digitalizzazione, che tutto sta cambiando e che pone risvolti etici, non solo economici, allo sviluppo delle tecnologie, al controllo che deve esserci, cioè l'uomo deve per forza controllare questo fiume in piena che è lo sviluppo tecnologico, per non venire travolto e per trarre comunque il meglio da quello che le tecnologie possono sviluppare. Per questo, al di là della ospitare l'Autorità dei trasporti, siamo disponibili con le nostre competenze. Ho visto qui a caso il professor Cambini, che è forse quello che ha più tradizione nella collaborazione con l'Autorità dei trasporti, a supportare qualsivoglia studio e divisione, oltre ad avere dato anche un forte contributo all'organico dell'Autorità dei trasporti, con tante persone che abbiamo cresciuto e che sono andate a rafforzare la vostra struttura. Quindi benvenuti e sono felice di ospitarvi qui per questo convegno importantissimo, per questa ricorrenza importantissima, e questo è semplicemente un primo passo di un futuro che sarà roseo e molto molto interessante. Grazie.
Grazie Rettore. La parola ora passa all'assessore ai trasporti della Regione Piemonte, Marco Cabusi. Prego.
Grazie e buongiorno a tutti, buongiorno al Presidente Zaccheo, al Rettore, al Sindaco e a tutti i partecipanti. Porto saluto del Presidente Cirio, che è impegnato fuori dal Piemonte in questi giorni e mi ha pregato di porgervi il saluto. Sfruttando il dono della sintesi del Presidente Zaccheo e del Rettore Guido Saracco, sarò anch'io molto breve, anche perché credo che i temi più importanti li abbia toccato il Commissario Gentiloni. Siamo impegnati in un momento storico del nostro Paese che fortunatamente ci ha donato, grazie al PNRR, risorse importanti per la mobilità sostenibile, e siamo impegnati in un momento in cui la concordia istituzionale tra Comune di Torino e Regione e il contesto internazionale, le scelte proprio di quegli anni, anzi forse di anni anni precedenti ci concedono un ruolo strategico nell'Europa. L'incrocio dei due corridoi europei sono, come dire, il frutto di come la politica in quegli anni ha voluto dare un'opportunità a un territorio come quello piemontese, che è sempre stato marginale nel contesto europeo per la sua collocazione geografica. Ecco, noi dobbiamo da un lato sfruttare questo momento storico, fare politiche comuni e renderci conto che la mobilità, come è stato ben detto, è un tema quotidiano e lo sarà ancora di più nel futuro del nostro Paese. Se davvero vogliamo combattere il cambiamento climatico e vogliamo affrontarlo in maniera propositiva, dobbiamo porgere all'utenza un sistema della mobilità competitivo, concorrenziale e a prezzi sostenibili. Quindi le iniziative che noi mettiamo in campo e che spesso ci fanno vedere le autorità regolatrici, le agenzie nazionali per la sicurezza ferroviaria come una gabella, come un ostacolo, invece diventano fondamentali da un punto di vista della sicurezza e dell'accesso equo a questo mercato. Quindi io a che fare con l'agenzia, insieme all'Agenzia della Mobilità, con ART, non posso che ringraziarli per la collaborazione, naturalmente ognuno nelle rispettive competenze e rispettando le leggi che ognuno ha di fronte a sé, però per un approccio costruttivo, seppur nella difficoltà dei temi, nella complicazione di questi mondi, con l'obiettivo appunto, dal nostro punto di vista, comune, di dare un servizio migliore agli utenti, di proporre una visione migliore del futuro, ma farlo soprattutto in maniera che tutti possano accedere al mercato in maniera equa e, se possibile, con prezzi e accessi migliori rispetto a quelli del passato. Credo che avendo visto esattamente il giorno di convocazione, il 17 settembre del 2013, era il giorno in cui io portavo mia moglie all'ospedale perché mia figlia è nata il 19, quindi abbiamo un percorso comune. In quel percorso comune credo che i primi 10 anni siano un bell'inizio, con, come dire, tante possibilità ancora di crescere e di migliorare. Credo che lo faremo insieme con gli enti del territorio, per questo vi ringraziamo.
Grazie Assessore. Adesso il saluto del Sindaco della città di Torino, Stefano Lorusso. Prego Sindaco.
Grazie davvero per questi 10 anni. Fatemi partire con un ricordo personale. Entrando, ho salutato il past president Andrea Camanzi e credo che si ricorderà anche lui di quando in quel settembre del 2013 cercavamo una sede per l'autorità di regolazione dei trasporti, che nella brillante intuito del nostro legislatore doveva essere pubblica, gratuita e immediatamente disponibile. E la sfida, ripeto, pubblica, gratuita e immediatamente disponibile. Pena la rimozione dell'ART da Torino, perché poi ovviamente questa cosa, io la dico con franchezza, all'epoca fu anche vista con diffidenza, un'autorità di regolazione nazionale che arrivava a Torino. All'epoca io facevo l'assessore all'urbanistica e ovviamente l'allora sindaco mi disse: Lorusso, questo è il tuo compito per te, occupatene. E ovviamente fortunatamente avevo il Politecnico che mi ha aiutato, vedo qua Guido, all'epoca il rettore era Marco Gilli. Trovammo la soluzione del Lingotto, che era pubblica, era sostanzialmente gratuita ed era soprattutto disponibile. Questa è, come dire, nasce il bambino ART in questa incubatrice del Politecnico di Torino, e 10 anni sono davvero uno risultato straordinario per tutte le cose che ha detto il Presidente Zaccheo nel suo indirizzo di saluto, che certamente riprenderà nelle conclusioni. Lo è per quello che ha detto il Commissario Gentiloni. Oggi il trasporto per la vita dei cittadini è una componente essenziale, decide in molti casi molto più di tante altre variabili: dove andare ad abitare, dove andare a lavorare. Il poter in qualche modo usufruire di un mezzo di trasporto, di avere un trasporto fruibile ed economico, può fare la differenza nella vita vera delle persone, nello scegliere la scuola, nello scegliere l'università. E quindi è chiaro che l'intuizione che fu alla base dell'istituzione dell'ART 10 anni fa è stata un'intuizione felice, cioè mettersi dalla parte di un'autorità che avesse la capacità di garantire l'utente e contemporaneamente verificare che i contratti di servizio potessero venire rispettati, che non ci fossero abusi nella corretta remuneratività di chi esercisce il servizio di trasporto a discapito dell'utente, che non ci fossero posizioni dominanti che consentissero in qualche modo di avere una deregolamentazione di fatto delle tariffe. Insomma, un complesso che ovviamente andava nell'ottica di guardare con un'autorità autorevole e terza rispetto alle dinamiche di mercato un settore assolutamente strategico. I settori in cui ART opera, peraltro anche traendo, come dire, spunti, credo, da quello che questo territorio offre come case history. Noi manca il mare in Piemonte, ma il resto ce l'abbiamo tutto, abbiamo gli aeroporti, abbiamo le ferrovie, abbiamo il TPL difficile, aziende decotte, aziende solide, autostrade con un sacco di problemi sulle concessioni, autostrade che non si fanno da 30 anni. Insomma, diciamo che, come dico io, il Piemonte e il Torino è un laboratorio abbastanza sintomatico di esercizio per gli esperti dell'Autorità di regolazione dei trasporti, e quindi davvero il mio ringraziamento, il ringraziamento di tutta la città per quello che i torinesi hanno fatto dentro ART e soprattutto i non torinesi hanno fatto nella nostra città, anche soprattutto in un momento in cui, e l'ha detto bene sia il rettore Saracco e l'assessore Gabusi, il trasporto è una delle assi strategici dello sviluppo dei prossimi decenni. Lo è in termini di connessioni. Fortunatamente, mi sembra di poter dire, abbiamo archiviato un dibattito stucchevole e sterile relativamente alla importanza di avere o non avere infrastrutture di trasporto. Penso ad esempio all'alta velocità con Lione nel corridoio Lisbona-Kiev, l'ha richiamato anche il commissario Gentiloni. Abbiamo archiviato alcuni stucchevoli dibattiti su come dire, il fatto che occorre investire sul trasporto sostenibile oppure no. Dobbiamo fare un passaggio in più, e quindi consegno in conclusione questa riflessione che vivo da cittadino, da sindaco, mettetela come volete. Il trasporto ha esigenza di essere supportato per quanto riguarda le infrastrutture, e quindi tutti quelli che sono gli strumenti di miglioramento infrastrutturale. Io mi consentirete, o qua l'assessore regionale, diamo corpo al servizio ferroviario metropolitano, colleghiamo Ivrea, tanto per essere senza andare tanto lontano, e contemporaneamente occorre mettere risorse pubbliche, perché per garantire un progressivo transito verso il trasporto pubblico locale, soprattutto occorre rendere il trasporto pubblico locale effettivamente più conveniente, più economico. Qualche giorno fa, voi rimanete a Torino in questi giorni, lo dico agli ospiti, perché Torino, insomma, oltre all'art ha un sacco di altre cose, c'è adesso anche il tennis, poi ieri Sinner ha vinto, quindi insomma siamo tutti esaltati da questa straordinaria vittoria. Per fare, un giornale torinese pubblica un confronto comparativo di 3 persone, 3 giornalisti che decidono di andare dal centro al Pala Alpitour e prendono 3 mezzi diversi. Uno prende il tram, uno prende un taxi e uno prende la macchina. Arriva prima chi prende il tram, e hanno fatto un servizio. Questo è possibile se e solo se noi supportiamo con leva di finanziamento pubblico a fondo perduto, l'incentivazione al trasporto pubblico. In assenza di questa scelta politica, che si traduce nella manovra finanziaria del governo, nel trasferimento puntuale ed efficace nei tempi previsti alle autorità regionali, e non usare le autorità regionali come banca in termini di casse, e poi da questa autorità regionale verso i gestori del trasporto pubblico, ecco, se riprendiamo, e sono contento che questa concorso istituzionale richiamata dall'assessore Gabusi, che sottolineo anch'io, può rappresentare davvero un elemento che coniuga il livello europeo con quello nazionale, e soprattutto quello nazionale con quello locale. Grazie per questi 10 anni che avete fatto a Torino, che siano i primi 10 di tanti altri. Benvenuti e benvenute a tutti quelli che sono a Torino per la prima volta, gli ospiti internazionali. Siamo in un luogo, come ricordava il rettore Saracco, straordinario, che è il nostro Politecnico, che orgogliosamente ospita l'Autorità regionale dei trasporti da 10 anni. Buon compleanno.
Diamo inizio ai lavori del primo panel sul ruolo dei regolatori e i modelli di regolazione. Prego i relatori di prendere posto al tavolo. Ve li presento. Patrick Vieux, vicepresidente ART, regolatore francese. Susanna Baptista, direttore della vigilanza della AMT, regolatore portoghese. Patricia Cordoviglia, direttore dei trasporti di CNMC, regolatore spagnolo. Martin Jones, vice direttore dell'accesso e degli affari internazionali di Auror, regolatore inglese. Christian Wolf, capo coordinamento internazionale intersettoriale dell'APNEZA, regolatore tedesco. Modera il professor Juan Montero, direttore del settore trasporti della Flores School Regulation. Prego professore, a lei la parola.
Buongiorno. piacere, anzi un onore partecipare a questo workshop internazionale. Ringrazio tanto l'invito al Presidente. L'autorità italiana è un modello per il resto dell'Europa. Oggi, al 2023, tutti parlano di multimodalità, ma 10 anni fa è stata una sfida creare un'autorità multimodale, non soltanto per un settore, ma anzi per diversi settori, modi di trasporto. Ma non è l'unico modello, infatti ci sono altri modelli, ci sono altre soluzioni ed è proprio questo che faremo oggi, una discussione sui diversi modelli di regolamentazione del trasporto. Ma questo è un workshop internazionale, gli invitati, i panel sono tutti di diversi paesi, quindi faremo in inglese, c'è la traduzione, quindi now I will shift into English and we will start a discussion. We want it to be a very informal panel. We want to have a real conversation about the topics. We will have a round of questions on the institutional models, then we will go to a second round of questions on the substance, on what are the challenges that each authority is facing. So I would like to start with a question to Patrick. Your institution is the twin sister of the Italian. I mean, you even share the same name, of course, in French, but you, even more confusingly, you share the same acronym. So everyone is talking about ART, but then you have to specify if it's the French or the Italian ART. So can you share with us, I mean, this model of this multimodal regulator, how it has worked in France, or whether you were inspired by the Italian model to go for this model?
Thank you, Ron. Hello, everybody, and thank you to Nicola Lacchio and the Italian IRT to welcome us. Yes, we are also a multimodal authority. We were born before the Italian one in 2009, so I don't know who inspired who, but actually we have quite similarities in our organization and functioning. Just let me say some words about us. We have a board of 5 people with a president and 4 vice presidents and a team of about 100 people, engineers, legal experts, and also economists. And so we also are a multimodal authority. The powers, I mean, the areas we cover is quite similar to yours, except for right of passengers and taxes, which we don't have. So we are present in railway sector. We give a binding opinion on tariff access and non-tariff access. We try to have a real competition within the railway market and facilitate the entrance of a new candidate, new competitors on this market of a railway, which is the core of our mission, because we began in 2009 with railway sector especially. We also have competences in urban transport, especially in Parisian region. We manage and regulate part of activities of RATP, la Régie Autonome des Transports Parisiens, and its relationship with La Société du Grand Paris, which is another public-owned company. On the airport, like in railway, we give a binding opinion on tariff of the airports, and we also monitor the investments of the airports. We have a core role on highways, as you have. Especially, we monitor the functioning of the toll system. We give not binding opinion, but opinion on new contracts and all amendments to existing contracts regarding the level of toll, the structure of tolls, and also the investments. We monitor the economic and financial performance of this sector, but I will come back on the sector of a highway. We also have a competence in road passenger transport. We regulate freely organized coach transport on intercity routes of less than 1 kilometer, and we take care about the absence of unfair competition between rail contracted rail and coach transport on the same origin destination. We also have the power to settle disputes between road passenger transport operators and the bus station managers in this specific sector. And at last, we have power in digital services and mobility data. Many of the former speakers stressed the importance of the data today, mobility data. So we are taking care about the opening up of mobility data to everybody who is interested in getting these data and propose services based on this data. We ensure that mobility data is actually made available by the producers on what we call the national access point, which is the sort of desk where everybody can have access to these data. We take care about the availability of the data, the accuracy of this data, and so on. Just one word, if I have time, to the powers, on the powers of authority, as in the case of the Italian one. We have 4 types of powers. The first is the legally binding powers that I talked about, to monitor ex ante the compliance with existing rules, whether in the case of tariff approvals in the rail and airport sectors, as I said, or regulation of the opening up of the rail and road passenger transport sectors to competition. This is our first and maybe key power. We also have regulatory powers provided by the legislator, and notably in terms of regular data collections that we do regularly. We have powers of guidance and supervision of regulated sectors through simple opinions or guidelines or reports and studies and so on. And at last, we have ex post quasi-jurisdictional powers to settle disputes and sanction the failure of regulated operators to meet their obligation, for instance, in the opening of a regional railway market. We are attentive that SNCF, the national company, give every data to the public regional authorities to enable them to organize their tender competition market and give the data, the necessary data, to every candidate to the competition. This is our 4 powers. And just one word to finish on the challenges. I would like to stress 3 challenges for us, ERT. The first is, as it was said before, the climate objectives set at our European and national levels. And I would like to stress that we are part of the ecosystem. Even if we are an independent organization, we contribute to politics of transport and, of course, to decarbonization of economy and transport. The second challenge is to keep prices under control. As you may know, we have a strong inflation today, and so the purchasing power of the users and also the competitiveness of the companies are a key problem for us. And so we are very attentive to have a control on the prices. And our third challenge is funding of transport infrastructure, especially in railway and airport. There is no possibility of any competition at all in railways if you don't have the network, if you don't have the investment in the railway sector. The 3 challenges in the railway is network, network, network. So we have to invest in the network, its modernization, its performance, and passengers, but also freight transport railway. And so we are attentive to have all kind of freight railway transports, what we call a railway highway, motorway, autoroute ferroviaire, but also combined transport, which is very dynamic in France today. Thank you.
I would have a question for you, maybe if you can devote just 1 minute. The fact that you have powers across transport modes, do you think has benefited your work, provides you a better insight, helps you with, I don't know, the environmental challenge, some modal shift? I mean, in what way do you think it's a positive thing to have these powers?
Yes, of course, to have multimodal, spectrum, vision is of course a trump. I mean, for our missions, especially on environmental issues. Our problem is the legal framework which gives us missions in any of these sectors are not homogeneous, you know. So it's very difficult to position ourselves on one sector, for instance, to incent people in railways to decarbonize, or on highways, but we don't have the same powers in this sector. And so we plead to the legislator, please give us quite similar powers in every sector, just to optimize the complementarities of our mission. But also it's a major point for us to have this multimodal approach.
So multimodality good, but it needs to be done in a coherent way.
Yeah, exactly.
With coherent powers.
Absolutely.
I think that's an interesting. So now we move to Germany. Christian, you have a different model because you are more multi. It's not only transport, it's energy, it's telecoms. So can you explain us how that model works?
Yes, when I came to Bundesnetzagentur in 2002, we were only what the Ministry of Post and Telecommunications had been before, so telecoms and postal services. And from that, we really grew into a different thing. We got energy regulation when that became more liberalized, and railway regulation, actually as an afterthought, basically, a rail regulation, because Bundesnetzagentur wasn't in the running to do that kind of administration, but in the last moments of legislation, someone said, well, but the problem set we have in rail regulation and access to rail is the same one as in the other markets. And we have people who are already doing that stuff, so let's give them the responsibility. And this has proven true, because the ideas behind monopolies and how to protect those monopolies are the same across sectors. So this has been a good thing. And from that point on, we still have grown into other sectors, or not really sectors, but into different things, because our core task is market regulation, access to networks, access to monopolistic networks. But we've grown beyond with the planning of energy networks, with consumer protection in telecoms sectors and postal sectors also. And now we have also the Digital Services Act, where we'll get some responsibilities. And time has proven this to be correct, because when we had the energy crisis with the Ukraine war, suddenly there was a need to have energy transports in Germany to make sure that the power plants still have the necessary resources to produce energy locally. And so the working together of the energy sector at Bundesnetzagentur with the rail sector of Bundesnetzagentur, it was really a good moment for us. And also from an administrative standpoint, we have a quite unique approach in Germany of how to do it, because we have something called ruling chambers. They are set up kind of like courts of law, where you have a triumvirate of people who take together a decision on specific cases. And we have 10 of those ruling chambers in Germany for the different sectors, really, which also makes it manageable, really, because our agency, with all these things we have to do, we are about 3,000 people across all sectors and across Germany. So we couldn't have one board of management that would be able to take all the decisions. So this is distributed to the ruling chambers, which are very transparent, because being set up like courts of law, they sometimes have public hearings, where if you talk about network statements of, say, DB Netz, the biggest infrastructure manager in Germany, you have the whole market coming in and discussing this in person. So this is quite transparent, quite open. And we've also gained experience with how to tackle different things, because as you said, Patrick, we have also powers of ex-ante regulations, quite extensive actually. And for the future, we also, I think, need to balance where ex-ante regulation is necessary, where ex-post regulation might be more useful. And also, when I started in rail regulation, there was this mantra of symmetric regulation, which was very much promoted by the biggest infrastructure manager in Germany, to say, well, all infrastructure managers are the same, so please treat us equally. Unfortunately, the largest infrastructure manager in Germany has about more than 30,000 kilometers of tracks, and the smallest one has four kilometers of tracks. So symmetric regulation isn't really true if you treat those two companies the same. So we need also to look at, we have 150 infrastructure managers in Germany, so we need to take a careful look at how we treat each of them so that access to the network works, because this is in the end the goal of all we do. Rail services shall work, shall run, shall benefit the public.
So, Christian, maybe a question for you. I understand this idea of the chambers, the ruling chambers. They are more specialized, they can focus. But then how do you ensure cross-fertilization across chambers? I mean, to take benefit of the experience in other transport modes?
Yeah, this is kind of market-driven in parts, because if we don't work together in the different sectors, the market will tell us when they take us to the courts. This is quite usual. Any interesting decision by Bundesnetzagentur is usually ending up in front of the courts because someone is suing us. And if we, for example, when we talk about interest rate, what interest rates are the right ones for railway undertakings or for energy companies. If we would use different principles in all of the sectors, they would tell us, and they would tell us, why do you take this one for us and the other one for I want the other one. So we by necessity need to work together and talk to each other. And of course, this is also simply done by having this really internal job market, because if you want to have done 10 years of energy regulation and you would want to see something else, you are able to take your expertise from the other sector and take it to a new sector and work there.
Thank you. So yeah, I think this cross-fertilization between energy and railways in particular is a very good example of this power of multi-utilities regulators. Yeah. And smart lawyers making sure that you are coherent. I think that's a very powerful incentive, yeah. Now we move to Spain. I think it's, well, it's interesting that it's also the 10th anniversary for the Spanish regulator, so I think there was a trend, something happened around 2013. And then in this idea of putting together more and more transport modes, utilities in Spain, we went even further. We have also the antitrust authority combined with the industry, with the network industries regulator. So what has been the experience in Spain with merging up to, I think it was 7 regulatory authorities into one?
Yes, thank you very much, Juan. First of all, let me thank our Italian colleagues for having us here in this beautiful Castello and auguri all'Autorità. Yes, we are in fact celebrating our 10th anniversary this year, well, the process giving birth to the authority was different from here and other countries. I think our model is quite unique. I think only our Dutch colleagues have something similar to us. Yes, in Spain until 2013, there were 5 independent sectoral regulators and 1 independent competition authority. And well, in 2013, the CNMC was created as a merger between these 5 independent regulators for energy, telecoms, rail, transport, and postal, and the competition authority. This is not a so common model in the European Union, as I was saying. The way we organize ourselves, well, we have the board is divided into two chambers, one for regulatory issues and another one for competition issues or competition files. There are 5 members of the board in each of the chambers, and the coordination among both chambers is guaranteed by the law which created the CNMC. There is an instrument which is what we call the cross reports between the chambers, whereas when a chamber is dealing with an issue that can have implications on the issues dealt with in the other chamber, a report is asked to the other chamber, and when a conflict, a discrepancy is the result of this cross-report, then the issue goes to the plenary of the board, which meets, I mean, every 2 weeks. So it's not so strange or rare to have an issue going to the plenary of the board, which is very good. This is like a formal coordination, and then there is informal coordination all over, and starting with the very first steps of our investigations. So among the teams, the technicians, there's also very good communication and very good results. And this is one of the things that I wanted to highlight, which is the very strong synergies that we find in this model, which is not perfect, but no model is perfect. But we find really very good synergies that we have been able to take advantage of. So, for example, and I think Christian was just saying this, we have worked with our energy colleagues in, for example, when the our infrastructure manager is now has opened the possibility for the rail operators to for energy self-supply. And so, I mean, energy is a very difficult issue, I mean, very complex legislation, regulation, everything, and we have had our energy colleagues advising us on this, which has been very useful for us, of course. Also, for example, and also, I think Christian also mentioned it, we have been working with our colleagues from airport tariffs. I mean, airport tariffs is within the directorate, but anyway, I mean, the airport tariffs and also telecoms have been, I mean, developed this this proxy to reasonable profit of regulated undertakings many years ago, and we have built also our model for rail on the basis of this experience of telecoms and airport tariffs. So here, a new synergy that we have been able to take advantage of. And then finally, with our competition colleagues, antitrust colleagues, competition advocacy, there have been also many synergies, many opportunities to work together. We even have, I mean, for example, our advice has been very useful for them when they have encountered, they have been, I mean, they have had to analyze commitments proposed by the undertakings to settle antitrust cases, for example, or merger cases. And also, for us, it is very good to have, we have this internal working group within the CNMC where we, as, I mean, this working group is about the liberalization of the rail market. And there we meet with our colleagues from antitrust, competition advocacy, and also legal and the economy divisions. and there we, we talk through, we talk about these issues we have in common, because it is actually, it's for competition colleagues and us, it's more or less the same principles, more or less same objectives, but different tools. So we find it really useful to talk to them in this working group that we have settled.
Thank you, but I think, I was thinking of questions as you were speaking, but then
But
you
I answered everything.
You posed all those examples of collaboration across network industries with antitrust, so allow me, I will not be raising any questions to you. So we have seen models of pulling together resources into one authority across transport modes, but not only transport, other network industries, and even beyond with the antitrust authority. But this is not the only way to do it. And then we go back to the beginning of it all, to the UK. They were the first ones to start liberalizing. They built somehow the regulatory model for many of these industries. And you didn't go this path of pulling together all these. So you have still a quite concentrated scope. So how do you work within, do you miss this wider scope, or are you happy with the powers that you have, and how does it work in the UK?
Okay, thank you, Juan. So good morning, everyone. And just firstly, thank you very much to Nicola and your team for the kind invitation to appear, and many congratulations to you and all your colleagues on your 10th birthday. It's quite difficult to talk about how old the Office of Rail and Road in the UK is. You could say we are 30 years old, because that's when the economic regulator for the rail sector was set up, and it was set up specifically as a consequence of the complete privatisation of our rail network and train operators in Great Britain at that time. You could say we are 17 years old, because 2006 is when the economic regulator was merged with the Railway Safety Authority to become the Office of Rail Regulation. Or you could say we're only 8 years old, because that's when we acquired our limited functions in relation to major roads. I prefer to say we're 180 years old, because that is when a safety authority for the railway in Britain was first set up. But whichever way you look at it, I think we've been around for quite a long time. But we are, as Juan said, we do have a role on roads in relation to the national agency that is responsible for our network of major roads. But we are 90% a railways organisation with a very broad remit within the sector. So clearly we are the regulatory body for the railway, as you would understand it in the context of the European directives, which continue to remain in place in the UK. So that means we are responsible for controlling access to the network, and we have a very significant ex-ante approval role in framework agreements, which are mandatory in the UK, between the infrastructure manager and the train operators. We're also the licensing authority for the railway, and in Britain we don't just license the railway undertakings, we license everybody. So if you run a station, if you run a depot, if you run a bit of infrastructure, you are licensed by us. And those are our core missions. That's what we were set up to do, and those roles exist to promote competition and to protect the public interest. Our remit includes being the wider economic regulator for the sector. So we carry out 5 yearly price controls for the National Infrastructure Manager. We've just concluded that process for the 5-year period that will run from 2024 to 29. And in essence, in that process, we are setting the access charges that are paid. And what we're also doing in that process is making sure that the National Infrastructure Manager has sufficient income and strong enough plans to deliver the outputs that the government wants from the railway in the context of the funding the government has available. And once we've done that process, we then spend our time ensuring that the National Infrastructure Manager delivers. So that means we have very strong regulatory roles on efficiency, on asset management, and on the operational performance of the network. We are also the competition authority, so we have concurrent powers with the wider competition regulator in the UK, and we have responsibilities for consumer protection. So, and just the last word on safety. So ORR is also the National Safety Authority, again in the context of the European directives, but we are also the occupational health and safety regulator for the railway, so like a labour inspectorate, but for the railway. And that remit extends beyond the big railway to all rail-based transport in the UK, so light rail, metros, trams, even heritage and touristic railways. Now, I think there's probably three. I'll just say one word about sort of how we work. So there's about 350 of us in ORR, but all our decisions are the formal responsibility of our board collectively, not the chair as a single individual. So the board, it varies in size, 10 or 11 individuals normally, and the majority of them are non-executives, so experts from a diverse range of fields, and I think that's a key way of ensuring we aren't too narrowly focused on rail, but the board delegates its authority quite extensively. So I think if I think about my own remit, which is in the context of the regulatory body functions, I think my team, it probably takes around 300 decisions per year under delegated authority. Maybe 30 of them need me to be involved. Probably 10 of those decisions, I need the help of my fellow, the help of my directors in the organisation, and maybe once or twice a year there is something in the regulatory body arena that is considered so contentious or difficult that the board will take the decision directly. So that is a key part of our model. So I think there are things we do miss out on from not being a multimodal regulator, but I think there is a real strength in integrating all the different railway topics in a single regulator. I think that works really well when we are considering to have safety integrated in economic decisions about funding for long-term management of assets. I think it's a real strength for the licensing authority to be responsible for consumer protection, because we've been able to introduce license requirements that go beyond passenger rights and into really much higher standards of provision. And I think having a strong regulator reporting, holding to account and enforcing independently on operational performance is a real strength. There are challenges, but at the moment we're in a good place. You know, we feel confident in our independence, and as the sort of leading authority for railways in UK.
Thank you. So, I mean, you are economic regulators. So in economic terms, I think it's very clear that you all see economies of scope. It's just that the scope might be different. So you see in some countries, the economies of scope is expanding to other transport modes and even beyond, while your model is economies of scope, it's digging deeper into the sector. So it's safety, it's competition, it's the pure economic regulation. So it's kind of the same concept, but evolving into different directions. And I have a question. I don't know, in other industries in the UK, you have very interesting, the fact that you have very specialized regulators creates interesting opportunities for appeals. Is that the case with transport also?
That's an interesting question. So we do, you know, a key part of our role. So when I talk about those decisions that get difficult and you know, require sort of closer supervision, maybe even the board actually taking the decision, they tend to be in the arena of appeals. But the way our system works is if you can't agree your terms of access with the infrastructure manager, perhaps they won't allocate you enough capacity, perhaps you're not happy with the fees or some other part of the arrangements. In a way, you don't make an appeal to us. What you do is you apply to us directly, and we can direct the entry of the infrastructure manager into the contract if we agree. I think some of our other regulators work in that way, but it is an area where I think we could sort of improve our regulatory cooperation within the UK, because you're absolutely right. We all see ourselves as having very specific remits in our sector, and while there are issues of commonality, I think the government feels there are areas of inconsistency in regulatory approach.
My understanding, let me put the question another way. In telecoms, for instance, my understanding is that the decisions of the regulator are challenged before the competition authority, before going to courts. So that's an interesting difference against the
So for our decisions, with the exception of the price control decisions, so they are challenged in front of the competition authority if the infrastructure manager objects. But generally speaking, our administrative decisions are directly subject to judicial review. So if I get something wrong, or I make the wrong advice to the board and they get something wrong, then we are in court against the person who's not happy. I have to say, the way judicial review works in the UK, it's quite a narrow process. I've experienced judicial review in France, which I found to be very different. But in UK, the judge will look at two things. That they will look at whether you followed your process, and they will look at whether you took a decision that was within a bandwidth of reasonability, that you weren't irrational. And our courts tend to place great faith in the expertise of the regulator, so it is a very high bar for somebody to overturn one of our decisions. And in fact, we've never lost a judicial challenge. Touch wood.
Okay, yeah, so it's independence, it's powers, but it's also about checks and balances. Largest countries in Western Europe. Then we move to a country that is smaller. I don't know if that makes a difference. I mean, we heard about authorities with 3,000 employees. That's a lot. So when you go to a smaller country, Portugal, how do you deal? I mean, how do you deal with economic regulation?
So good morning. First, thanks for our Italian colleagues for the invitation. On behalf of the Mobility and Transport Authority President, Ana Paula Vittorino. So the Portuguese framework law for independent regulators also celebrated a decade this year, and in fact AMT, together with two other regulators, organized a two-day event to discuss the past, present and future of regulation in Portugal. So in Portugal we have 11 independent regulators which operate in various areas such as finance, energy, communications, aviation, water and waste, and mobility and transport in the case of AMT. They all have a board of directors and a single supervisory or fiscal committee, and the framework of each regulator may establish other advisory bodies. The board of directors is composed by one chairperson and up to 4 members who are appointed by the parliament on a proposal from the government, and their competence for the position is assessed by an independent commission which is responsible for the recruitment of top state management positions. The members of the board perform their duties exclusively and for a maximum period of 6 years, non-renewable. So the Portuguese independent regulators play an essential role in the regulation of economic activity, in the defense of services of general interest, in the protection of rights and interests of users and consumers, and in the promotion and defense of competition. And they act with independence, quality, transparency, and efficiency. Independence from political decision makers and from regulated companies, avoiding what we call the capture of regulation. And for this reason, Portuguese regulators are only accountable to Parliament and don't depend on government, and their revenues don't depend on the state budget. With compliance with high standards of technical quality, with transparency, promoting public discussion and the public knowledge of the most relevant information, and with efficiency in the management of the resources. So regarding AMT is a nationwide regulator that supervises and regulates mobility and road, rail, maritime and inland navigation, also the infrastructures, including ports. Similar to, I think, the Italian Autorità and also the French regulator. So we are multimodal except aviation. There's an independent regulator only for aviation. AMT has powers covering regulation, supervision, the promotion and defense of competition, and also sanctions. We ensure that the mobility and transport market operate in a fair, efficient, and transparent manner. We are concerned, for example, that investment is efficient and sustainable, especially looking at the goals that Portugal has committed itself at national, European, and international level. We are also concerned about the quality and territorial coverage of services and infrastructures in the most appropriate way for users, whether they are companies or citizens. We also have a responsibility to monitor constantly the market. We have an observatory that produces statistic studies, and we have the responsibility to identify flaws or distortions that could harm competition or the public interest. We have defined as strategic priorities to promote the improvement of the framework and supply in mobility markets, including the boost of digital services, as well as to boost mobility and transport literacy, innovation, the fight against climate change at national, international level. To this extent, we have intensified our regulation and supervision activity, both in issuing opinions and preparing studies. We also have the power to issue binding decisions, for example, in public roads passengers transports, and through our supervision actions on the ground with public and private operators, which we have been reinforcing since this year, in 2023. The promotion, as I said, the promotion of literacy and knowledge is one of the commitments of our president, that our president made to the Parliament, contributing to the definition of balanced and sustainable public policies, and involving public entities, companies, citizens, universities, and innovation and research centers. And we are also intensifying the cooperation with other entities, such as the Portuguese-speaking countries, the United Nations, the International Maritime Organization, to identify and promote best practices regarding the fulfillment of the Sustainable Development Goals. Concluding, please.
No, I mean, conclude, please. Very tough one.
I would say that regulators are decisive in shaping today's Portuguese economy, more competitive, with more informed agents and equipped with a stronger institutional framework. There are some key issues that need to be discussed, such as the increasing complexity of the regulators' competencies, arising from the new challenges of, as already mentioned today, digitalization and energy transition and climate change. So reflecting on the past, present and future of regulation in Portugal, it is important to stress that regulators must keep up with technological evolution and equip themselves with the necessary technologies and knowledge to improve the efficiency of regulation, concerned with the central issues like intergenerational equity, environmental protection, consumers' safety, and promotion of social welfare.
Thank you, Susanna. So now we move to the second part of the panel. I mean, we have discussed about the institutional structures, and I don't know if I should be sharing this with you. I mean, a little bit how we prepare it, what is in the source. So I asked them, what are the challenges you have for the next 12, 18 months? Basically, what keeps you awake during the night? And then I had a little bit of competition between the authorities, because some of the topics were common, so we had to rearrange. So I'm sure we will have a little bit of discussion also in this second part of the panel. So maybe we can, again, go back to the beginning. Go back to the UK, which was the first country that started liberalizations in transport in the very early 90s. But at the same time, I think we are all a little bit puzzled about how this competition for the market model that was created 30 years ago might be getting to an end or not. I mean, I think it's a very good opportunity to get a little bit of information of how the model is doing and what are the directions moving forward. Please, can you share with us?
Yeah, thank you, Juan, and I will do my best. So as Juan was alluding to, historically, or since the early 1990s, the railway in UK has been highly liberalised. So very strong competition for public service contracts with lots of different bidders and lots of different winners. Public service contracts that have actually been quite short, and with the private sector winners of those competitions, directly taking revenue from passengers and bearing that risk. Alongside that, we've seen I would say a moderate development of open access competition, particularly on our main sort of north-south route, a freight sector that is entirely commercial. There's no significant public subsidy going into rail freight in the UK, and of course an independent regulator set up to ensure fairness and non-discrimination in allocation of capacity, with the ability to enforce and take direction. So I would say that since from the early 90s, it's a model for perhaps the framework that subsequently developed in the EU, but also actually for most of that time a model of compliance with that framework. But for at least the past 5 years, we have been experiencing a period of considerable uncertainty about the future of our industry in Britain, about the future of the regulator, and it's probably just worth saying a bit about what sort of prompted that. And of course, as we all know, one of the challenges that is always levelled at liberalisation is that it has the potential to create a fragmentation of decision making. And in May 2018, we had a very bad experience of that in the UK. There was a major programme to reorganise the railway timetable in large parts of the country, but the programme failed. And when the new timetable was implemented, the operational performance of the network and of train operators fell to a catastrophic level, and the service for passengers was awful. And we were asked to review what had gone wrong and to make recommendations. And what we found essentially that in a big program like that, there were lots of interdependencies between different actors. So there was a supply chain responsible for new rolling stock that was part of the program. The infrastructure manager was responsible for all the for some enhancements to the network that were needed, and train operators were responsible for retraining, getting their drivers competent for the new timetable, and various bits of that program went wrong. And there were two problems in that nobody felt a responsibility to be open and escalate those risks that were emerging, and nobody felt they had the authority to take the decision to say, we're going to stop this. So it went ahead in a suboptimal way, and it was a disaster. And the government's response to our review was to propose the creation of this concept of a single guiding mind for the railway in Britain. And the basic proposition is to combine the Public Service Contracting Authority, the Transport Ministry, with the infrastructure manager into the same organisation, which you can readily see does not appear to be, in the spirit of the wider EU, framework. But it has always been proposed that there would be, if this change went ahead, that there would be significant safeguards for open access freight and other public sector operators. So that has been the basic proposition that's been floating around since 2019. But a couple of things have kind of buffeted that and stopped things going forward. One is COVID. So that had a significant impact on revenue. It had a massive impact on the way our public sector operators were contracted, so they were all taken off revenue risk. So if you pay for a train ticket in UK, the money goes straight to our treasury. It goes to our finance ministry. It doesn't go to the operators. And the way that the public service contractors are controlled now is very different. They have management contracts which detail what they have to do. They are paid a fee to do it by the Transport Ministry. There are some very small performance bonuses. There's also less money around post-COVID, so what you're also seeing is fewer services are being contracted by the public sector. The other issue we've had over the past 3 or 4 years, which maybe you read about in the news, sadly we have to, is we've had a lot of political instability in the UK. 3 prime ministers in 4 years, an election in another 12 months. So the legislation to execute this change, it has never been progressed. It is still in front of a committee of the Parliament in draft form. And the idea of that is to have some scrutiny and build some consensus around what happens next, so that following the election, whatever administration comes in has something to work with. But I think where we have been, where the proposal has changed from a very radical vision of bringing this guiding mind together and, curtailing the powers of the regulator, that has moved away in the face of very strong objections from the operators who wouldn't be inside that tent. So public sector operators who belong to other authorities, open access operators, and the freight sector, about how they would be treated by that combined infrastructure manager and public service contractor. And what we're also seeing in UK at the moment is, in the past 12 months, is a renewed enthusiasm for having more open access competition. And this is really coming from our finance ministry and from our Prime Minister's office. They want to see more private sector operators on the railway. Our owner groups, so the people who typically bid for public service contracts, they don't like the current contracts. The margins are very low. They're not very interesting if you're a commercial person, because you're being told what to do all the time by a bunch of civil servants. And they think there's a bit more risk in open access, but a lot more reward. And they're talking about, can we take some services out of public service contracts and run them on an open access basis. And I have to say, they continually cite this country, Italy, as a model for somewhere that has had real success with promoting open access. So I think in terms of what the future looks like, and it's hard to look beyond, into a long horizon, as it's an election year. So I think there are few changes foreseen to what we do as the regulator, and actually an emphasis that our role would expand, because if you've got a single entity responsible for train operation and infrastructure management, you would want independent oversight of the train operation side as well, in a way that doesn't exist today. We have been through this very complicated process of thinking about what EU law we want to keep and what we want to get rid of. A really sensible approach has prevailed, and we are making no changes to our legislation that implements the directives. We are removing a few of the technical parts. I don't detect anywhere in government or in the sector an appetite for significant divergence, and actually the challenge for us is going to be keeping pace with the EU, which is why international cooperation is so important to us. You've got some radical proposals. I think Christian's going to talk about them around strategic planning. That is something we're keen to understand, we want to work with. We have major international connections, for example, where I work very closely with Patrick and his team, where we have made commitments to keep a degree of alignment, because we recognise that's how services stay commercial and they keep running. So you are going to see us present and wanting to be involved in international work. And, I think the emphasis for me is, if a reform of that nature does happen in the UK, and I have to say, it's very uncertain, I think there is a wide acceptance that it creates the need for a stronger regulator, not a weakening of it, if you're going to make it work. So that was quite a long answer to quite a short question, but I hope it was helpful. Thank you.
Very interesting. Maybe if I might pick up some ideas, I think the fourth package is not only about open access in high speed in particular, as we see in Italy, in Spain,
but it's also about tendering public service applications. I think it's very interesting, this evolution in the UK from this, in EU terms, we call from the concession model to a service contract model, what you call the management model. I think this is something that maybe we want to think about when we start going to the tenders. But then I think it's also very interesting, this lesson. When you move to these purely service contracts, no operational risk, lower margins, then there is smaller interest. And then you are evolving, and this is very interesting for us, more into the continental model of an open access. Or there is that's been discussed, so you are getting closer in that sense to what we are experiencing in Italy, in Spain, a little bit also in France. And I think we are also converging on this idea of the infrastructure manager having more of a coordinating role. I think this is kind of we see it in the latest proposals by the Commission. So I think it's interesting that there is a convergence there, a common challenge. But this is a multimodal panel on the anniversary of a multimodal authority. So I don't know if someone wants to react a little bit to these ideas, the PSOs tendering, Patrick?
Yeah, just thank you, Juan. Just to say that, yes, you have two levels, to harmonize the level of risk with the characteristics of the market, and I think it's difficult to have at-risk contracts on our railway sectors, actually.
Patricia?
Yes, thank you very much. Very interesting your experience, Martin. We will look at it more closely because we are, actually we haven't yet in Spain liberalized public service obligation services, but we will have to in just a couple of years. We have to have, by 2026, we have to have 3% of the current public service contract open to competition, meaning, I guess, the ministry will have to organize a public tender. We have that. What we have now is an experience in conducting economic equilibrium tests. So we have had, as you know, in Spain, we already have 2 competitors to the incumbent, and these 2 competitors are interested in also giving service in some of the lines which overlap with public service obligation services. And for that reason, we are conducting these economic equilibrium tests. And what we are finding, which is quite interesting, is that these operators are ready to provide the service with better prices than under the public service obligation contract, which means that, as we do these tests, we keep narrowing the room for new services competing with the public service obligation services. And we are calling the attention of our ministry to redesign, to reshape the scope of the PSOs, because we might find ourselves in the end protecting with this test this contract which leaves the passengers worse off. So that is the thing that we are dealing with right now.
Yeah, I think the borderline between what is commercial and what is public service in railways probably will be more fluid than it has been in the past. Patrick?
Yeah. Just to add one point, I think especially in this capital industry as a railway, you have to arbitrate between the visibility for investment and the security which is necessary. And it leads us to the framework contract, for instance, giving visibility to investors. Because if you want to have new operators on the railway market, you have to give them visibility. And not visibility year by year, but 20 maybe, or 10 or maybe 15 years. So, and the second point is you have to choose between competition for the market and competition in the market. And I think you can have both of them.
contracts, so it's the right time to move to road. So Patrick, yeah, your institution is not only about rail, it's multimodal, so what keeps you awake at night on roads, coaches?
Too many things, actually, but yeah, I will talk you about highways. If you allow me, I just would like to open a bracket concerning what Susanna said regarding the position of the regulator within the institution. It's very interesting because you said that the Portuguese regulator does not answer, does not report to the government. And when you talk about independent regulator, the question is independent from whom? So, of course, it's independent from regulated. But we see more and more every day that we are independent from the government, which is a difficulty because we are a part of the executive power. And it's interesting to see in France that the text are the text. I mean, we don't answer, we don't report to the parliament officially, but the parliament itself understood the interest to found on the regulator to control the government. And so it's very interesting that you see the relationship between the regulator, the government, and the parliament switching, you know, I mean, evaluating just because of the way the different institutions position themselves to control everybody, I mean, the others. So, yes, highways. I would like to say a few words about highways because, as you know, we have a network, a French network of toll highways, about 8,000 kilometers. And this highways, I mean, the 6 historic contracts will be end between 2031 and 2036, which is very soon, actually, if you look at it at the scale of the infrastructure. And we have a dialogue with the government. We issued a report last year, or the beginning of 2023, on the economics of the highway concessions, and trying to call attention of the government on some key issues that should be dealt with before the end of the contract. The first priority, as far as we think, is that the government should pay attention to the state of the network, to the condition of the network, and to be sure that the network will be restituted, will be remitted to the government, to the state, in good condition. And as you may know, in the concession, the restitution is free of anything. So the government should have the means to monitor the condition of the network, then, which supposes to have a discussion with the concessionaire, with the operators of what is the good condition, how do you define it, and who controls that the network is in good condition, who prescribe a program of work to upgrade the network where it's necessary. It's a very, very difficult point. The second point we call the attention of government on is that we say to the government, you have to think of the after of the concession, which means, do you want to keep tolls on highways or not? And do you want, if you want to keep tolls, do you want to keep concession model or other model? I mean, public management, for instance, or PPP, other PPP. There are many, many forms possible. So you have to think of it. But if you think about concession, you have to redesign your concession. You have to redesign the perimeter of the concession. Today, some of the networks are very, very huge networks, and it reveals it's difficult to manage this contract for the public authority. So we say to the government, you should have smaller perimeters, more competitors, and you also should have shorter in duration contracts. the contracts are too long, and every time you amend the contract to adapt to circumstances, you are in an asymmetric situation, asymmetric negotiation, of course. And so the way to avoid too numerous amendments during the life of the contract is, of course, to shorten this duration of the contract. So we incent the government to think of this question, and also to think about the sharing of the risk between the public authority and the private companies, because they are private companies. Sharing the risk regarding traffic, regarding inflation, and so on, and to go further on this reflection. And on this specific point, Italian authority has many things to teach to us, because I think you are in advance on this kind of a reflection. And we have an agreement with the Italian authority or in preparation, and we want to take benefit of this agreement to exchange experiences and cooperate on this reflection. And my third and last point is about the contribution of the highway sector to decarbonization of transport. And as you may imagine, there is today a sort of dispute between the concessionaire and the government, because the concessionaire wants to spare times in order to bring the public authority till the end of the contract, in order to not leave any choice to the government to extend the duration of the contract for some years more. And so this is the reason why the government has to anticipate and to prepare the after. But immediately, I mean, from now, the sector needs to invest in environment and decarbonization. And this program of investment will, will go beyond the previous end of the contract. So the concessionaire say to the government, how do you want me to invest for a huge environmental program when I see that part of this investment will not be amortized before the end of the contract? So you have to give me more years in order to match the two durations. And we say to government, there is another option, which could be what we call in French a soult, or a balance payment, which means that at the end of the previous contract, the network are restituted to the government, and the part of the network or the investment which is not amortized is compensated to the private investors by a soult, by a payment. And so you see this on these various subjects. It's very important that the government anticipates. It's not easy because it's technical difficulties. The private sector is not exactly enthusiastic to go ahead on this program. Their interest is a sort of inertia. And so we are the sort of incentive to the government. And also, this is the reason why I talked about the parliament. Also the parliament, who wants, from a political vision, who wants this sector evaluate, both regarding the tolls and the level of the tolls, and the contribution of the sector to the environmental issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Now we go back to railways. Martin, you were hinting to this evolution in the UK of the infrastructure manager becoming a little bit the coordinator of the system. And in the European Union, we also have a very interesting evolution. I think in railways, it's difficult to talk about revolutions, but definitely the proposal that the Commission has put on the table for capacity in the railway, for management of capacity in railway networks, is definitely a very fundamental change.
It's this strategic capacity planning. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit about the proposal and what is the reaction of our regulatory body to that proposal.
Yes, thank you. But I'd like to start a little bit earlier already because, also because of what you said, Martin, I realized the largest problem not the regulators have right now, but the sector has right now, is people. We have a demographic change and we're feeling it. There's hardly a day in Germany where you don't read in the news that some service can't run because they don't have train drivers. Where some signaling boxes can't be manned because they don't have people, they don't have enough resources. And this is partly, of course, due to demographic change, but this isn't unexpected. We knew this was coming for years. But it's also a problem of planning and investment and digitalization, which did not happen in the way it should have been. And so one way to deal with this problem is actually the changes now proposed by the European Commission on the on a new capacity regulation, which takes a different approach, a really different, I would say it's a revolution really, because it changes how traffic is done in Europe as a whole. Because there's a lot of more pre-planning. This is market-driven. There have been the TTR project, timetabling and capacity redesign for smart capacity, I think. The name has gotten longer over the years, which is more focused on freight traffic, international freight traffic. We also have a similar idea in Germany called the Deutschlandtakt, which is more about getting a good system in place for passenger traffic. But the idea is the same. Let's start 5 years ahead and look at what kind of capacity we expect to have in 5 years and what kind of traffic we can and we want to fill it with. Because also, Patrick, you mentioned freight and passenger. There are different interests in different countries because when we speak to the Netherlands, they always have a keen interest in freight transport through Germany especially. Whereas if you speak to the public authorities in Germany, of course, they want to have the local passenger traffic running in the busy regions. And all those interests are valid. They are all right. You can't throw anyone out. And so we really need to make all of them work. So thinking about in advance, thinking about how to distribute the scarce capacity we have on the rail networks right now is crucial. And this is a change that's proposed by the regulation. And for us regulators, that means also a shift of focus, because right now we look at the network statements that will stay, but we also look at disputes over who gets capacity, conflicts in capacity allocation. And this will decline in the future because the more pre-planning we have, the clearer it will be when the timetable change comes, who will get the capacity. That will be more simple decisions for the infrastructure managers to make. But that just means the interesting decisions will be made at another point in time, 5 years in advance or 2 years in advance. And what the regulation really, really needs to get right is that it's not the infrastructure managers who have an interest in which kind of traffic runs. It's the railway undertakings that want to do business. It's the shippers that want to get their goods from the ports to their destinations. It's the public authorities that want to make people move. And right now it's really done in a way that gives very much power to the infrastructure managers. There's supposed this European network of infrastructure managers who take decisions on how this capacity structuring is done, that take decisions that go beyond their own sphere of interest, really, because it also affects the service facility operators. And if you don't get the ports on board and the freight terminals, then freight traffic won't work, because it needs to work for them too. So getting the market input and a strong voice really, and a say in how this capacity structuring is going to work in the future is really one of the crucial changes that needs to be done to this regulation. And from a regulatory standpoint, we need to be there to be able to protect the market, because if you have a dispute between the users of the network and the infrastructure managers in this European scene, you need to have someone to arbitrate, someone to take decisions and make things work. And this is one of the worries I really have. It needs to work across Europe for the cross-border paths. And it's not quite simple to have a bunch of independent regulators that really are keen on their independence also, but still we need to work together on a European basis. So how do we manage to do that? How are the rules to do that? So there's a lot of work to do still in the capacity regulation, and I think we regulators also working together in IAG Rail are trying to help this along.
Maybe, I mean, this idea of a very active infrastructure manager has a very clear example in Spain, where for the liberalization of high-speed rail, the infrastructure manager decided the packages, how many competitors, what would be the timetables. Patricia, what was your role in the regulatory body, in the supervision? As Christian was saying, a more active infrastructure manager probably requires a very active regulatory body, right?
Yes, that's right. Well, yes, we, as I was saying before, we already have 3 operators competing in 2 high-speed corridors, and we have 2 in another corridor, and we will have 3 hopefully in the following months, also in that corridor. And this has been possible because the infrastructure manager arranged this allocation of capacity with a perspective of many years ahead, so that the operators could make their investment decisions, which is crucial for them to invest in our market. Well, our role there was we actually advised the whole process, and then finally approved the framework agreements of the infrastructure manager with these 3 operators, which I mean, and the process is developing in a positive way, we would say. Even though when you enter a framework contract, this also has a few disadvantages from the viewpoint of flexibility, because within the framework, I mean, you have obligations in both sides, and for example, operators are, if they don't use the capacity as prescribed in the agreement, they face large compensations to the infrastructure manager, which is quite strict when you know, things come along and things happen. We have seen COVID. We were liberalizing and introducing competition coinciding with the beginning of the pandemic, which was very unfortunate for the sector. So you can imagine all the estimates and all the things that we were expecting weren't happening because we weren't moving, we weren't able to travel, and also we have faced the very sharp increase of energy prices. Energy costs being one of the main cost concepts that the operators face. So yes, and yes, we think that with the infrastructure manager given big powers to pre-plan, which we think is a good idea, and we agree very much with the regulation in this area. With an infrastructure manager with these big powers to pre-plan and plan the allocation of capacity, we need strong regulatory bodies on the other side. And here comes one of our criticisms to the proposal to the regulatory to the European Commission's proposed regulation, which is that there we see you have the decisions are taken by or are going to be still taken by the the national infrastructure manager in cooperation with the other infrastructure managers. The new EU infrastructure manager, I mean the ENIM, is going to have quite strong powers to issue some documents that, although non-binding, will have a kind of
influence.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it is going to be. I mean, we fear that the regulatory body will be a little bit like. Will have a little bit less margin for maneuver when it will be facing not only the opinion and the decision of the infrastructure manager, the domestic infrastructure manager, but also, if it is the case, that the infrastructure manager, the national infrastructure manager, is mirroring or is acting in compliance with what ENIM has said. So we think that we would need like a kind of balance on the other side, so that, for example, the enhanced ENRB will have the ability to give an opinion about these documents drafted by the ENIM.
Thank you. You want to? No, I just agree that there are some dispositions, some provisions in this draft regulation which is not satisfactory, and we have exactly the same analysis as Spain, but as also other regulators. It seems to me that there were mighty lobbying by the general, infrastructure managers till the Commission, close to the Commission, and I think we have to balance actually exactly as Patricia said, the powers of the infrastructure managers by one of the regulatory bodies. And when I say balance, I think there is actually an equilibrium today. Presently, there is a balance, and we don't want this balance to be destructed. We want it to keep it both on national and European level, and you will not replace the balance on national level by a new balance or imbalance on the European level, and we need to have powers both on European level as regulatory bodies and on national levels. It's very important for us.
So more pre-planning, but some flexibility, and maybe governance is an issue for this new model. So now we go back to basics. Track access charges, regulation, economic regulation, access regulation. That's the bread and butter of what you all do. And at the moment, this is a big challenge in Spain. So track access charges. Patricia, what is the situation in Spain?
Yes, well, it is a big challenge for us. We are, I mean, as you know, what we have done in Spain is being called like the Spanish model, kind of something very unique. We have these three operators competing in the market in the high-speed lines in Spain, which has been a good thing from the point of view of course, of the passenger experience. More services, better prices, lower prices, differentiation of services also, all good things. But there is this challenge because we have, I talked about, well, COVID and also the sharp increase of energy prices, which have challenged the results of the operators present in the Spanish market right now. And we are now focusing on an instrument that could ease a little bit things and guarantee the success of the model, which is track access charges, of course. So in Spain, what happens is that the infrastructure manager comes with this inertia that it had, where, and we have seen this in these comparisons within IRG Rail, where direct cost is very high compared to what we have in other countries, and then markups are low. As you all know, in the regulation says that infrastructure managers should recover through track access charges the direct cost, and then other costs, if it is possible, if the market can bear them, through the markups. So we are now undergoing an exercise, and actually we have some draft guidelines by the CNMC on public consultation until the 22nd of December, where we try to first establish how direct costs should be calculated, since we have seen that our infrastructure manager is coming with very high direct costs, which are not really direct costs. And then we are trying to interpret what the market can bear test might mean. And well, I could explain further in detail if you were interested, but for these direct costs, what we have done is conducting an econometric study to find out. Well, we have done it with one of the biggest cost lines for the infrastructure manager, which the infrastructure manager was introducing as direct cost fully, and we have found that only around 25% of this cost is really a direct cost. So we hope that in the future we will find a direct cost calculated by the infrastructure manager, which is more in line what our colleagues from other countries of the European Union have. And then for the markups, what we have come out with is that we have found that Ramsey-Boiteau pricing is a good system to have into account the different market segments' ability to pay, which is necessary for this market compare test, we think. But then there's other things we have to ensure, which is that the markups do not exclude any segments that are able to pay the direct cost. So we are proposing to do so, or to supervise this, taking account or overseeing that the markups don't reduce the final segment, the final demand of the different segments, considering all relevant factors into account, also evolution of GDP, inflation, energy prices, etc. Also, we have the requirement that markups must respect the productivity gains of the operator. So, and in this field, what we are doing is that we are constructing a hypothetical efficient operator, which I think our French colleagues also do, which is based on the average costs of all the operators to oversee whether these productivity gains of the operator, of the hypothetical efficient operator, are respected by the track access charges. And then for the first application of this model, what we are, and exceptionally in this first application of the model, what we are proposing is that we also take into account that there is an equilibrium between income and costs of this hypothetical efficient operator, because we have this very particular situation in Spain where track access charges have remained the same since the beginning of the liberalization process, while prices of the final service have decreased a lot. So here we have, because of competition, because I mean the trains, you have to fill your train to be able to put it on the tracks, and also the framework agreement doesn't give much margin not to put the train on the tracks, and so we all have to do and to make an effort so that we make more intensive use of the network, and we don't. I mean, we can keep our three now competitors on the line. So that would be it. Thank you very much, Juan.
So maybe also the activity of the Italian regulator is paving the way, because they already went through this process of review of track access charges after the introduction of competition. We are getting to the end of the session, but maybe if you want to have a short reaction, short comment on track access charges, Patrick, you want to?
No, I don't want
1 minute, please.
To talk too much. No, we had the same reflection. We also had a binomial tarification on conventional contracts, because the approach is different depending on its open market or contractual market. But yes, you're right. In France, we have a very high level of tariff access charges. So we said to the government and to SNCF Réseau, well, we have nothing to say, especially about the level of the charges, but we have something to say about the structure of the charge. And so we incented SNCF Réseau to go through this reflection on binomial in order to allow every competitor who can pay, can cover the direct costs to be able to go into the market, and trying to cover the maximum of the fixed price, the fixed costs, even if it's partly part cover. So I will not go further in this technical subject, but yes, I think that every regulator in Europe is now, thinking about sophistication of the price, access charge, and the European framework from this point of view is well written. You have economic principles which guided the writing of the directive, and so yes, there are many benefits to take from going through this economical approach on access charge.
Thank you. Martin, some ideas from the UK?
Well, it's just reflections, I think. So the first one is about markups and their relationship with open access, because I think we've very much found that they are a double-edged sword in a way. So we have introduced a markup, we call it the infrastructure cost charge, for open access services that operate in what we've defined as the interurban market. So if you're running between two big cities, and one of the impacts of introducing the test is that obviously it reduces the potential profitability of the open access proposal. But on the other hand, in terms of the economic test we apply, it improves the prospects of the open access operator passing our test to get approval to access the network, because it gets netted off their abstraction from the public sector, and it also creates a very favourable impression with government, because they can see that there is more of a level playing field on charges between the open access operator and their public service operators. So one of the ways we've responded to that is we've set that charge lower than what we think the market can bear. is, so we've set it at about 2/3 of what we think the market can bear to try and get that balance between profitability and a level playing field.
Thank you. So we move to the last topic. I mean, at the end of the day, we are all here for a passenger. So we will have some words on what the Portuguese regulatory body is doing on passenger rights.
So AMT in Portugal is the national enforcement body in the EU for passengers' rights in road, rail and maritime transport and inland navigation. It's an important topic for us. As I said before, Portuguese regulators, one of their competences is to protect and promote consumers' and users' rights, considering the fundamental right to have access to services of general interest. In the case of AMT, the fundamental right to mobility. In Portugal, we have, and I think it's not very common among other European regulators, we have every operator that attends the public, that deals with directly with public, has to have a complaint book. First, the complaint book was only physical, and then after 2015 and mainly 2017, a digital complaint book was established as mandatory. We have an online platform. It is very easy to use. It is available in both Portuguese and English. And everyone who wants to file a complaint has only to identify itself and write the reasons for the complaint, and it can also attach documents. So the regulator for each sector is identified in the platform, so the people who files the complaint already knows which enforcement body is being considered. So in AMT we monitor on a daily basis both the physical and the digital complaint book, and we also receive complaints directly. And this activity is very important for our regulation and supervision competences. We publish twice a year a report about the number of complaints, the main operators who receive the biggest number of complaints, and also the reasons. Our experience with the European Commission is that because we are a multimodal regulator, our experience is kind of unique. I mean, the other regulators don't have this knowledge on complaints and passenger rights because they only deal with a specific mode. And one of the issues that is being discussed at EU level is the problem with multimodal passengers' rights, because the EU regulations are specific for road, rail, and maritime and inland navigation, and it's being discussed how to improve passenger rights that choose to use more than one mode of transports, because if the passengers are aware of their rights when using more than one modes, they tend to use only one mode of transport. And if we want to improve public transports and achieve the decarbonization goals that were set by United Nations and also at European level, It's important to promote multimodality, and passengers should be aware of their rights and how to deal with problems like lack of information or lack of compensation in the case of delays or rerouting, and lack of support and also information concerning passengers with reduced mobility. So this is a topic that we follow very carefully.
Thank you very much. I think it's been a quite intense session. I think we deserve for coffee, also the audience. So I think thank you very much for all the panelists and for engaging.
Ora passiamo al secondo panel. Si sente? Prospettive europee e globali della regolazione economica, che vede la partecipazione di Elisabetta Garofalo, della DG Move della Commissione europea, Rosario Macario, professoressa dell'Istituto Superior Tecnico di Lisbona e membro dell'Advisory Board dell'ART, Juan Montero, direttore del settore dei trasporti della Florence School of Regulation, Tano Spallis, professore dell'Università del Pireo di Atene e membro dell'Advisory Board dell'ART. Modera il componente del Consiglio dell'Autorità di regolazione dei trasporti, Francesco Parola. Prego, consigliere.
Grazie, ben ritrovati dopo la pausa caffè. Ci apprestiamo quindi a iniziare questa seconda tavola rotonda con 4 illustri ospiti. Il titolo della tavola rotonda è Prospettive europee globali della regolazione economica, quindi un titolo molto ambizioso e anche molto ampio. Nel provare a preparare questa tavola rotonda ho dato ai panelist alcuni spunti che insomma sono liberi di seguire, almeno in parte. Il primo riguarda il tema della armonizzazione della regolazione a livello europeo. Chiaramente è un tema rilevante per quei settori di trasporto dove ci può essere competizione anche solo potenziale tra modi di trasporto tra i diversi paesi, come il settore portuale, oppure per quei settori in cui c'è continuità tra una nazione e l'altra, quindi c'è necessità anche di integrare le infrastrutture, pensiamo al mondo ferroviario. Poi un altro tema sicuramente molto sentito è quello dell'efficienza. Quindi la regolazione è chiamata a spingere i gestori delle infrastrutture ad essere più efficienti e a rendere i modi di trasporto più sostenibili possibili per ridurre le emissioni, ma non solo, e cercando un'ottica il più possibile integrata e coordinata tra i modi di trasporto. Un altro tema, che è un tema chiaramente antico, è quello di garantire un percorso di liberalizzazione e di apertura al mercato. Questo sappiamo che molte autorità sono nate esattamente per questa ragione e in molti paesi abbiamo ancora oggi, ma anche in Italia ovviamente, un problema magari di difesa implicita o esplicita dei campioni nazionali, che chiaramente devono anche lasciare il passo a nuovi operatori. E poi abbiamo un tema che è quello tecnologico, i dati, la data-driven regulation, quindi la necessità di utilizzare sempre di più e meglio i dati per fare regolazione, ma anche per fare monitoraggio della regolazione. Ai panelist ho dato circa un quarto d'ora per esporre la loro relazione e poi magari faremo una piccola domanda di approfondimento. Iniziamo con la dottoressa Elisabetta Garofalo, che è già stata presentata quale funzionaria della Commissione europea presso la DG Move. Ha una importante esperienza a livello internazionale in termini di procedure di infrazione della disciplina ferroviaria europea e della disciplina europea dei contratti di servizio pubblico e quindi diciamo, può certamente rappresentare quella che è la situazione in ambito ferroviario a livello comunitario, focalizzandosi sulle principali sfide in un'ottica di integrazione a livello europeo. Prego, dottoressa.
Proviamo così, sì, mi sembra che funzioni bene. Ho già vinto una prima sfida, la mia giornata è fatta. Beh, intanto vi vorrei comunicare il mio grande piacere di essere stata invitata qui in questo quadro e contesto assolutamente splendido per ripercorrere un po' con voi quelli che sono quello che è nella nostra ottica il ruolo dei regolatori, le relazioni tra la legislazione comunitaria e voi come regolatori, e tracciare anche il quadro di quelle che sono le sfide comuni che uniti spero che potremo affrontare con successo. Piccolo aneddoto personale, ieri mentre mettevo appunto il mio intervento riflettevo che la prima volta che andai a Bruxelles, dove poi avrei passato la maggior parte della mia vita lavorativa, avevo preso un biglietto Interrail. E sempre in quei tempi spesso viaggiavo dal sud al nord dell'Italia per motivi privati con i treni della notte, e mi dico che questo passato, che è un passato remoto, alla fine somiglia al futuro prossimo, perché siamo proiettati verso un maggiore uso del ferroviario anche per i tragitti internazionali, e i treni di notte, i treni della notte vivono un momento di revival che è non soltanto sentimentale, ma spero anche di business economico, e quindi vedo questo avvicinamento, da un lato i romanzi di Asimov e l'intelligenza artificiale, insomma un passato che si trasforma e si trasforma in futuro, e trovo particolarmente interessante essere nel mezzo e lavorare nel settore dei trasporti, e in particolare del ferroviario, che è un po' il cuore pulsante del Green Deal, è il cuore pulsante anche della strategia per la mobilità intelligente. Vorrei evitare di farvi la solita pappardella su quelli che sono gli obiettivi dell'Unione Europea, che sono molto sfidanti per il ferroviario. Proprio in pillole, un raddoppiamento della frequentazione dei servizi ad alta velocità da qui al 2030, rendere emissioni zero tutti i trasporti collettivi al di sotto di 500 km e a triplicare il numero di passeggeri sull'alta velocità all'orizzonte 2050. Sì, bellissimi obiettivi, ma poi a chi sta a realizzarli? Non siamo noi che dobbiamo realizzarli, sono gli Stati membri, siete voi, e per questo, per arrivare a questi obiettivi c'è bisogno dell'apporto di tutti. Quindi queste le indicazioni generali di politica europea, sulle quali si sono innestate anche delle altri imperativi, quella per esempio di potenziare i collegamenti trasfrontalieri, e qui l'Italia direi che è in pole position con gli investimenti previsti sulla Torino-Lione, anche il tunnel del Brennero, avete un ruolo direi cardine per garantire la mobilità tra il nord e il sud dell'Europa. C'è la sfida di una maggiore concorrenza, nell'ottica non certo di fare concorrenza così fine a se stessa, ma nell'ottica di migliorare il servizio, di apportare più scelta, di ridurre anche i prezzi e, al di là dei prezzi, direi i costi, in particolare del ferroviario, che sono elevati ed è difficile comprimerli. L'Italia in questo contesto ha presentato un piano di sviluppo e di rilancio ambiziosissimo che l'Europa finanzierà con dei finanziamenti che direi sono tra i più elevati tra i paesi europei. È bello avere i fondi stanziati, bisogna poi anche utilizzarli questi fondi. E utilizzarli per costruire le infrastrutture senza ripiegare magari su investimenti che sono meno interessanti in un'ottica europea. C'è anche la sfida di utilizzare al meglio la capacità ferroviaria esistente, per esempio l'enfasi sull'IRTMS, questi nuovi sistemi di segnalamento, e un migliore utilizzo della capacità attraverso nuovi meccanismi di allocazione della capacità. Ne parlavano i nostri colleghi con il futuro regolamento sulla gestione della capacità che si sta discutendo adesso proprio in questi giorni al Consiglio, e anche non da ultimo la sfida della digitalizzazione, perché la transizione come voi sicuramente sapete, prevista dal Green Deal, è verde e digitale. Qual è in questo il vostro ruolo come regolatori ferroviari? Qui vorrei brevemente citare un economista tedesco, Friedrich August von Hayek, che diceva: è essenziale che l'accesso a qualsiasi attività economica sia aperto a tutti alle medesime condizioni e che la legge non tolleri nessun tentativo da parte di individui o gruppi di limitare tale accesso con forza palese o larvata. Era il 1944, io direi che ne è stata fatta di strada, ma ancora resta da fare, e lì trovate proprio tutto il vostro ruolo e la dimensione da svolgere. Un regolatore forte e indipendente è al cuore, direi, del sistema ferroviario. E posso dire che parlo del regolatore italiano, ma lo stesso si potrebbe dire anche per molti regolatori che sono molto degnamente rappresentati qui oggi. In 10 anni siete stati un enfant prodigio, avete realizzato cose che effettivamente 10 anni fa erano impensabili, e il vostro ruolo è stato fortemente potenziato anche dalle direttive europee, quindi la direttiva del 2012, ma ancora il vostro ambito di competenza era limitato perché non erano aperti i trasporti ferroviari nazionali, per cui pian pianino con l'apertura dei mercati siete stati chiamati a svolgere un ruolo sempre più importante, sempre più vasto. I miei colleghi hanno già parlato della geometria variabile che esiste, no? A livello di regolatori ci sono i multimodali, ci sono quelli che sono integrati con le autorità di sicurezza, con le autorità di concorrenza, con i diritti dei passeggeri, il benezza, che è addirittura l'integrazione di tutte le industrie di rete, quindi c'è una grande molteplicità di modelli. In fin dei conti, al di là di questa molteplicità di modelli, quello che conta sono i poteri che sono attribuiti ai regolatori. E lì non tutti sono nati uguali. Ci sono regolatori che si sono visti attribuire poteri vasti, parlo per esempio della RT France, ovviamente dell'ART italiano, e altri regolatori che invece hanno fatto più fatica a vestire i panni di regolatori potenti e indipendenti. Io direi che questa forse è la prima sfida della regolazione che vorrei menzionare. Quindi prima di parlare di armonizzazione, di efficienza e dei temi su cui vorrebbe che mi soffermassi il professor Parola, io vorrei dire che la prima frontiera è quella dell'indipendenza. Per voi è acquisito, italiani, in altri paesi così non è. Viviamo ancora oggi, noi come Commissione europea, i tentativi di certi Stati membri di mettere il bavaglio ai loro regolatori o di ridurre le loro competenze. Questo anche in paesi in cui il potere del regolatore è chiaramente affermato, come la Francia. Ogni tanto ci sono tentativi di dire ma togliamogli questo, togliamogli quello. Dovete sapere che noi siamo sempre al vostro fianco e che quindi non esitiamo anche ad aprire procedure di infrazione se vediamo che l'indipendenza è strutturalmente minacciata o se non vengono date ai regolatori le risorse che sono necessarie per svolgere il suo compito, perché quando un regolatore di un paese come la Spagna, e ci sono i colleghi lì, ha un organico estremamente ridotto e dei compiti che invece vengono potenziati dalla normativa europea, è chiaro che c'è un problema di risorse e il regolatore non è in grado di svolgere al meglio quello che deve fare. Anzi, io devo dire che il lavoro fatto dal regolatore spagnolo è veramente esemplare, considerando i limiti in termini di risorse umane e finanziarie. Abbiamo fatto una procedura di infrazione che ha dato dei frutti e l'organico del regolatore spagnolo è stato potenziato. Quindi questo è un esempio per noi i regolatori sono fondamentali. Da un lato perché rappresentano il nostro braccio nell'enforcement. La struttura di enforcement c'è la Commissione che ovviamente controlla che le direttive vengano applicate, e poi sul terreno ci sono i regolatori. Gli operatori non devono venire da noi in prima linea, la prima linea siete voi come regolatori, quindi c'è un ruolo fondamentale che non vogliamo in nessun modo limitare. Per questo quando ci vengono fatte denunce noi rinviamo sistematicamente ai regolatori nazionali, proprio nell'ottica di conservare e preservare i vostri poteri. Dunque, direi che a questo punto devo un pochino accelerare. Avrei molte cose da dire, ma concentriamoci allora sulle sfide che io vedo nel vostro lavoro nei prossimi tempi, che sono sfide per voi, sfide anche per noi come Commissione, perché sono dei vasi comunicanti, quello che voi vivete nell'amministrazione quotidiana, nel nostro lavoro quotidiano, deve risalire verso di noi come spunti per migliorare la normativa europea, e spesso questo accade e ve ne siamo grati. Quali sono quindi i grandi cantieri dal nostro punto di vista come Commissione europea? Allora, il regolatore ovviamente si occupa di pedaggi, si occupa di accesso all'infrastruttura. Per quel che riguarda l'accesso, secondo me ci sono due punti ancora abbastanza sensibili sui quali dovete continuare a operare come lo state facendo. Uno è l'accesso alle installazioni di servizio. Secondo me l'accesso alla rete, diciamo che ci siamo abbastanza in termini di garanzie per i nuovi operatori, però un nodo delle installazioni di servizio ancora rimane in vari paesi. Noi facciamo qualcosa ovviamente a livello di procedure di infrazione, ma vi invitiamo a continuare a essere molto vigilanti. Altro nodo è sull'accesso degli operatori in open access e il test di equilibrio economico. Lì dobbiamo fare un mea culpa molto grande. Noi come Commissione europea abbiamo creato un canovaccio per questo test di equilibrio economico che consente di bloccare, che è l'unico modo per bloccare un operatore open access se questo recherebbe danno eccessivo a un contratto di servizio pubblico. Noi abbiamo creato un canovaccio in un momento in cui non c'era alcuna pratica, alcun ritorno di esperienza, e confidiamo nel vostro aiuto, nel vostro input per migliorare e per dare più contenuti prima o poi a questo regolamento di attuazione e ai contenuti della direttiva. Quindi io invito la coalizione dei volonterosi che è l'ERG Rail, ma poi in realtà tutti i regolatori, a cercare di armonizzare le loro pratiche. O perlomeno i criteri che utilizzano. La Francia ha molta esperienza in questo ambito, anche l'Italia ha una certa esperienza, e questo per noi è assolutamente fondamentale, perché vediamo che l'applicazione di questo test equilibrio economico spesso finisce per ostacolare gli operatori open access in modo indebito, quindi quello è un cantiere importante. Pedaggi, anche lì avete fatto un lavoro straordinario sul calcolo dei costi diretti, sui markup, però pur tuttavia dobbiamo constatare che c'è un'enorme disparità a livello proprio dei markup e dei costi diretti tra un paese all'altro. Vediamo la necessità di un'ulteriore armonizzazione, o quantomeno delle indicazioni che speriamo di consolidare in guideline interpretative, quindi a diritto costante, perché in questa fase non si prevede di modificare la direttiva, per trovare il giusto equilibrio, soprattutto per i markup, perché i costi diretti ormai secondo me avete già svolto la maggior parte del lavoro e riducendoli, questo per noi è stato assolutamente una grande conquista, quella di vedere i costi diretti scendere, però sui markup ci sono ancora delle incertezze metodologiche e constatiamo che in alcuni paesi il sistema dei pedaggi non funziona nel senso che non si arriva a quello che secondo noi è l'obiettivo principe, che è quello di ottimizzare l'utilizzo della capacità dell'infrastruttura. Riteniamo che certamente c'è un difficile equilibrio da trovare tra gestire quello che resta da recuperare come costi una volta considerati i sussidi pubblici, da un lato, quindi si è limitati dall'envelope finanziaria stanziata dallo Stato, e da un lato, però dall'altro bisogna cercare di tutelare i segmenti più fragili nell'ottica di utilizzare al meglio la rete, che non è finita, insomma, le risorse non sono infinite. Quindi questo è sicuramente un altro cantiere. Un'altra fondamentale, direi, opera che state svolgendo e dovete continuare a svolgere è sul fronte operativo, direi l'ottimizzazione e l'efficientamento dei traffici. C'è molto da fare, nel senso che attualmente i treni si intralciano, questo nuoce alle velocità operative da un lato, oppure ai tempi di percorrenza per i pendolari. Capisco che non è sempre, anzi non è assolutamente facile operare una divisione dei flussi quando l'infrastruttura è sempre la stessa, però ritengo che abbiate già fatto emergere alcuni spunti su come cercare di conciliare esigenze diverse. Per esempio l'alta velocità certamente è il vostro fiore all'occhiello, ma non bisogna neanche lasciarsi accecare, a mio avviso, dalla volontà di avere collegamenti sempre più veloci, se questo va troppo a discapito, per esempio, di traffici tipo dei pendolari che magari potrebbero utilizzare delle tratte più efficienti e più ad alta velocità per offrire un miglior servizio. C'è un equilibrio da trovare, che è anche un equilibrio politico, perché gli Stati membri hanno sicuramente il loro ruolo da svolgere nell'indicare le priorità da dare ai diversi tipi di traffico, ma senza il regolatore che metta ordine in questo groviglio difficile arrivare a dei risultati coerenti. So che si lavora anche sull'orario cadenzato. Okay. Anche l'orario cadenzato, che è applicato con successo in certi paesi, secondo me è una buona pista per l'ottimizzazione e l'efficientamento dei traffici. Il controllo della performance del gestore dell'infrastruttura, anche quello è un cantiere interessante, perché per ridurre i costi dell'infrastruttura è necessario andare verso una maggiore efficienza, quindi un controllo della performance, se possibile parametrato a livello europeo, come prevede anche il nuovo regolamento sulla gestione della capacità, dovrebbe apportare i suoi frutti. Vi si chiederà molto anche sul fronte del coordinamento. In mancanza di un regolatore europeo, in questo momento noi non ne vediamo ancora troppo l'esigenza, o perlomeno questa esigenza non la vediamo scaturire dalla base, dobbiamo basarci sulla strada della cooperazione rafforzata. Quindi vi si chiederà di coordinare di più a livello internazionale, tenendo conto in particolare di tutte le problematiche del cross border, quindi dei servizi trasfrontalieri, molto trascurati e molto penalizzati anche, non soltanto sul fronte dell'allocazione della capacità, ma anche sul fronte dei pedaggi troppo elevati per il segmento internazionale. Lì c'è tutta una sfida, secondo me, che saprete fattivamente raccogliere. Quindi da parte nostra un qualche compitino a casa anche per noi come Commissione. Le guidelines che vi abbiamo promesso sui pedaggi dovrebbero aiutarvi anche nel vostro operato. Il regolamento sulla capacità che si negozia in questo momento al Consiglio, so che non tutti ne sono felici, ma è stato frutto anche dei limiti giuridici nell'ambito dei quali dovevamo operare. Speriamo che non sia ulteriormente castrato dalle procedure di colegislazione che sappiamo non sono semplici. Dal canto nostro dobbiamo sicuramente rivedere un po' di termini, perché i 18 mesi per il test per i nuovi servizi, lo capiamo, sono eccessivamente lunghi, vedremo un po' se si può fare qualcosa. Porti, anche la disciplina dei porti, in particolare delle ferrovie, delle linee ferroviarie all'interno dei porti, è complessa e dovremo prima o poi metterci mano, speriamo con il vostro aiuto. E poi c'è la multimodalità, lì siamo in piena definizione di questo regolamento per cercare di avere anche una biglietteria multimodale. Vi confesso che non è semplice. Quindi, per ricapitolare, il nostro lavoro si imbrica strettamente con il vostro, voi siete i nostri alleati, ne siamo consapevoli, spero che anche voi siate consapevoli che anche la Commissione europea è sicuramente al vostro fianco e vostra alleata.
Grazie. Sono spunti davvero molto interessanti e direi che si è anche riuscita, insomma, nella complessità a dare anche organicità, no, ai vari temi trattati. Faccio solo una piccola domanda di approfondimento. Insomma, hai citato un tema che in autorità, insomma, abbiamo già dovuto affrontare, quello dell'equilibrium economic test. Io mi aggancio a questo non tanto per parlare dell'equilibrium economic test, ma per parlare di un tema che è quello un po' della competizione, tra virgolette, tra flussi di domanda diversi, quindi treni ad alta velocità o comunque genericamente l'open access, anche in chiave internazionale, i treni regionali che giustamente devono dare continuità ai territori e poi, purtroppo poverine per ultime, le merci, quindi tutto il trasporto merci. È chiaramente questa anche se ci saranno e ci saranno tanti investimenti in nuove infrastrutture, un po' una never ending story, nel senso che questo problema ci sarà sempre. E quindi si pone nella regolazione il problema di definire criteri di priorità da assegnare di volta in volta a questi flussi di domanda. Ecco, la domanda è sostanzialmente questa. Ecco, a tuo avviso quali possono essere alcuni di questi criteri, ma soprattutto se, a tuo parere, la sostenibilità ambientale, quindi emissioni di CO2, possono essere messe in alto in questo ranking, tenendo presente che l'open access, anche in chiave internazionale, dovrebbe essere sostituto dell'aereo e i treni regionali ovviamente dell'auto privata, quindi c'è anche queste considerazioni intermodali o intramodali di cui tenere conto, quindi altre modalità di trasporto che sono in competizione col treno.
Ma il tema è sicuramente molto interessante, l'infrastruttura è limitata, le cose che si possono fare senza nuovi investimenti in infrastruttura certamente prima o poi toccano i loro limiti. Quello che vorrei dire è che le situazioni sono molto diversificate da un paese all'altro. Ci sono paesi in cui le reti sono molto dense e fortemente utilizzate, paesi in cui invece si ha la fortuna di avere reti sottoutilizzate, quindi difficile esprimersi in modo generale. Io direi che sta alle autorità pubbliche trovare quello che è un corretto equilibrio tra promuovere un pendolarismo efficace, quindi dare per esempio una certa priorità ai treni regionali, ai treni locali da un lato, e invece privilegiare degli spostamenti di lunga percorrenza che siano rapidi e che possono sostituire il trasporto aereo. L'Italia è in ottima posizione per quel che riguarda i trasferimenti intercity rapidi, prova ne sia che Ryanair non opera più tra Roma e Milano. Quindi secondo me sono stati fatti molti passi avanti. Al margine però sicuramente c'è la domanda se non si possa accettare una leggera riduzione della velocità per il traffico passeggeri per consentire un pendolarismo con tempi di percorrenza più rapida. Questi sono arbitraggi che vanno fatti sulla base delle specifiche situazioni locali e tenendo conto degli indirizzi direi politici, perché il diritto alla mobilità è qualcosa che, o il tipo di mobilità che si vuole fornire è una decisione, direi, molto di policy. Politica non mi piace come parola, io preferisco parlare di policy e quindi il lavoro del regolatore, secondo me, si pone a valle di queste decisioni di policy, come ottimizzare o dare vita a decisioni che sono prese nell'ottica del, diciamo, il benessere e il bene comune generale.
Grazie molte. Passiamo dunque al secondo speaker, alla professoressa Rosario Macario, che invito ad accomodarsi al podio. C'è da caricare una presentazione, benissimo, grazie. La professoressa lavora all'Università di Lisbona presso l'Higher Technological Institute e appartiene anche al Civil Engineering Research and Innovation for Sustainability Department, un dipartimento del quale è già stata anche vicepresidente e ha una vasta esperienza internazionale sia a livello accademico che anche di consulenza nel mondo dei trasporti in vari settori del trasporto. Come è già stato detto è co-coordinatrice dell'Advisory Board dell'Autorità e quindi chi meglio di lei può parlarci dei MaaS, Mobility as a Service, mettendo in evidenza quelli che sono un po' gli aspetti di frontiera di questi servizi innovativi caratterizzati da criticità senza dubbio, ma anche da potenzialità importanti. Grazie.
Thank you Francesco, and I will start by congratulating the Authority of Regulation of Transport in Italy for this 10 first fruitful years. So President Zacchero, my congratulations and thank you for the invitation for being here. So, as my colleague Francesco said, I'm going to present you in a very brief way the report that we are about to finalize and to deliver the final version early December on mobility as a service and what are the implications and what are the difficulties. So the report was done by myself and by two other colleagues, Luigi Dell'Olio and Greta Tellarini, both also members of the advisory board. So mobility as a service is like the Columbo's egg. I think everybody knows the Columbo's egg history. So after it is done, it is obviously so easy that it's unbelievable. But the issue is, in fact, is to get there and to get to the point that it is easy. And we must start by understanding what gave root to this event or to this phenomenon that in fact is born outside transport and that becomes so important inside transport. So we have to look into the trends and what happened to our society, mostly our Western society. So rising urbanization, aging population, climate change, digitalization. So all this made the urban life somehow a little bit more difficult than it used to be. And at the same time, there was an unstoppable development of technology, like the Internet of Things, the cloud computing, the big data analytics, artificial intelligence, that has been developed as if it is something that goes and runs in parallel to our lives. And suddenly they had to come across. Demographics is also one factor of change, of course, and the aging of the population, and also the fact that we are becoming more and more urban, and that is a reality that is, of course, contributing also to the congestion and to the flux of the population concentrating every day to the city center. Resources scarcity are one of the difficulties that we have, sustainability, energy supply, security. So all this makes and brings the complexity of the urban environment and of the urban life. And of course, results in inequalities. It is more or less inevitable that there is a very strong evidence across Europe about this. And this is a major concern. So what was the nudge? The nudge was something that was communication. Information communication has been the nudge. It has particular characteristics like volatility, scale, and complexity. So the ICT development enabled us to compress time, to influence choices, to lower the costs, to use artificial intelligence and be confronted with the Moravec paradox, which basically says that rational requires very little computation, but if you really want to implement it, the devil is in the detail and it requires a lot. Automation and robotics and reshaping of the world. So in fact, this has been the nudge that has put some people thinking about this, about all these elements and how they could come across mobility. And of course, we have mobility cultures changing. Our generation is substantially different from the previous in what concerns mobility. The next generation, our children, think in a completely different way. They consider it to be a nonsense to have a car, for example, and the generation after, it will be even more different. And that is a reality, and that is a reality that is changing the values of the society. So mobility as a service basically born from the question that we have done several decades, that is, how can we make public transport use easy? Because the fact is that it is difficult when we compare to the use of the private car. And so it was this question that in fact generated this phenomenon, this emerging concept that aiming to integrate the various transportation services into a single platform and through a digital interface. So basically, in the neighbor, next door, not inside our box, but outside our box. And this was extremely disruptive. Disruptive because it made us think out of the box. And what is the essence of this? Well, basically, digitization, connectivity, real-time information, no need to pre-study, no need to pre-prepare to use the services. It is given to you, the information in doses, just like in your car. So you see the arrows in the street and you follow. And it is this type of easiness that was the ambition of doing it. It was coined in 2014 in the ITS Congress for the first time, and it spread in an extremely rapid and wide way. And the scope is, we can say, endless, because it starts with mobility, but it can bring so many other agents of the urban dynamics inside, from the simple restaurant, the simple cafe, the laundry, everything can be inside the mobility as a service. So it has this capacity that can go through from the strategic vision towards the operational opening. So the architecture can be very diverse, the configuration. We can have one provider, we can have several providers competing, we can have a federation of providers, so several configurations and designs are possible. It depends on a number of requirements, and especially it depends on one main requirement, that is, how do we use data? Open data, how do we use it? And so how far are we? We are still very far from what is the complete concept and the complete implementation of the mobility as a service. Our report provides some benchmarking examples and gives us also this reality. It is on purpose that you cannot read, but it gives you the dimension of how far and how complex it is from the institutional setting point of view. There are too many elements in the mobility as a service that goes from who does what to who authorizes the use of what type of data, and all this has to be regulated. All this has to be planned and has to be organized, and the communication between the agents has to be settled, not only in terms of content, but also in terms of what are the methods, what are the mechanics of using it. So institutional setting is fundamental in the mobility as a service, and it is much more critical than it was already with public transport simply. So it implies definitely a change of paradigm. A change of paradigm because we have to move from what we used to plan, that is a rational of predict and provide, So, and in the prediction, typically we project the world as we have it today, and that is a basic difficulty. That is, the world of tomorrow seems to be quite different from the world of today, and so we have to move towards the paradigm of aim and manage, which is not only forecast but backcast. What do we want to be in 20 years' time, and what do we have to do to reach that point? This is, it seems to be simple, it's like a Columbus egg, but it is quite difficult to change this paradigm, because it is a paradigm that spreads across all our rational, all our decisions, all our regulations. So there is a legal issue, of course, because we have to move from a paradigm that is model-centric to a paradigm that is user-centric. And this is a big differentiation that has to be done, besides more details on the legal issue. And of course, in terms of scope, we have at least 3 pillars that we have to address. We have to address the enabling structures that will facilitate the data exchange. We have to experiment the paradigm. We have to give awareness of people of this paradigm and how they can use. It is a strange element to the world of mobility that joins, and so it has to be acquainted, the population has to be acquainted with it, and of course it has to be supported by a very strong digitization of the public transport operators. Without this, there is no mobility as a service. And of course, this implies negotiation with the operators and implies many changes that have consequences from the financial to the operational and functional point of view. So there are barriers, of course. Nothing that is related with change goes without barriers. And of course, the first barrier is, of course, this change of this approach that we have in the transport sector of mode-specific towards to user-specific and integrated view. The second barrier is related to the fact that there is no harmonization still, and so we have to set standards and harmonizations in relation to the data and also in relation to the API, so the application programming interface, to which there was already some advance done here in Italy in relation to this, but it is still a barrier until the moment that it is completely overcome. The European Union can, of course, be a support and a very significant advance in relation to all this, because it enables a standardization, it influences, and it pushes forward in an influencing way the acceleration of all this process. And of course, the governance of all the mass system is also a barrier, because this is an element that is outside the current transport system. So, and this has been the main difficulties in the countries where the mass emerged, was how it is going to be regulated, because it was not a regulator of transport, because this was not a transport mode. Then which regulator is going to take care of this, and then, but the effect is going to be on the mobility sector. So it is a sort of an inter-regulator issues that has to be also addressed, and this can also be can also be a barrier. The preparation of the transport providers for this, the aggregation and the anonymization of data, because people want to make it easy, but they don't want to have their privacy violated. So this is an issue. And the last barrier, the integration in terms of ticket, in terms of permit to use the system. So this is of course an issue. So which are the triggers? How can we, who can accelerate this? Which triggers? Well, interoperability and standardization for sure. There are several triggers. We have just put here the ones that we think are the key in terms of in front line. Data sharing and open APIs, of course. Licensing and permits, pricing and fair competition. So all these are triggers that can be activated by regulators, or that at least requires a regulatory action. User and data protection, public-private partnership, public awareness and education, and performance monitoring. In the places where there was a first experiment of mobility as a service, the first regulatory action has been in relation to data access. How to use data, which type of access, data, how to use it, which permissions to use the data, and how to deal with privacy and the use of the data. So this is, I would say, a key element. So who are the potential pioneers to do this? Well, municipalities, of course, can be. Association of municipalities, because today the reality is not anymore only urban, but it is conurbation, it is metropolitan. The transport service providers, I would say they are the main beneficiaries of the process, because by making the use of transport easy, the demand is expected to increase also. Association of operators, startups. And of course, it has to be supported by user communities, which means that consultation with users, engagement with users from the first time, it is extremely important. And research and academia can, of course, give a very strong contribution to this. So we have a couple of recommendations to finalize, and of course, this recommendation is related to the institutional setting, the need to set the institutional arrangement, the need to achieve an environment of trust, which is related to the provision of data and to the use of data, and how people can trust that the use of data will not violate their privacy, the need for integration of transport system, also across cities. It's not only within one city, but it tends to be across cities, and to create the conditions for the other economic agents to consider mass as an opportunity, consider mass as a good partner that in fact will improve the experience and will improve the added value of the mobility chain by joining other agents. So the first step toward the digital transport system, and of course the existing barriers, they have to be object of an analysis, of a deep analysis in relation to this implementation, so that it can be understood what is the added value for the user and what are the eventual needs in terms of compensations and contingency measures. And thank you for your attention.
Grazie molte per la presentazione, anche tu sei stata molto brava a sollevare tantissime tematiche, le barriere piuttosto che i trigger per lo sviluppo di questi servizi. Una domanda molto veloce. Immaginando una roadmap davanti a noi, quali azioni chiave, key actions, dobbiamo prioritizzare per implementare, per sperare di implementare questi servizi innovativi?
I would say, well, that is a bit also part of the triggers, sorry. It is also a bit part of the triggers, but as I've already said, the institutional setting is fundamental. Why it is fundamental? Because it goes beyond the borders of what is the traditional transport regulator. So it cannot be only the transport regulator to establish this and to take care of this, because it enters into the universe of communication, of information, of data protection, etc. And so this institutional setting is fundamental, and we have the experience already, just by the analysis of urban transport issues, that we know from the outset that institutional setting is today responsible for many of the misperformances we have in the field. So this is a fundamental issue. The next issue is the digital framework and the digital equipment for all the operators, because if it's not fluid, if it doesn't work in a fluid way, it will jeopardize the concept from the start, from the board. And then people will lose trust and then it will not use, and it will be, then the recovery of the image is very difficult. So these two elements are absolutely fundamental. Of course, then after this, it comes other issues related with the agreements between the operators and all these things. But these two are two pillars fundamental for a successful implementation. And the non-successful implementation can have such a high cost that it will be then very difficult to recover it again in terms of trust of the population in the system. So it is really fundamental to start not jumping into the operational output, but be sure that the pillars are sufficiently robust to resist to the implementation.
Molto chiaro, grazie. E parlando di digitale, veniamo al terzo speaker, al professor Juan Montero, che è professore di diritto amministrativo e di regolazione economica all'Università Nazionale di Formazione a Distanza a Madrid, oltre che docente alla European University Institute e alla Florence School of Regulation, ed ha una vasta esperienza nel mondo della regolazione economica, nelle industrie a rete, sia quelle tradizionali, sia quelle invece legate, diciamo, a settori emergenti come quello del digitale. Quindi gli lascio certamente la parola proprio per focalizzarsi sul ruolo dei dati e delle informazioni nel mondo dei trasporti, quindi network industries vecchie e nuove che si integrano per una mobilità migliore.
Grazie mille per la presentazione. Noi a Firenze, alla Florence School of Regulation, we are very lucky because we have a very good view perspective. Not only because we are in this very nice villa in the Fiesole Hill, so we have a very nice view of the city, but because we host, I would say, around 500 people every year to have events to discuss about transport regulation. And if we go beyond transport, energy, telecoms, it will be a couple of thousand people. So I think it's a very privileged place to identify the trends, the long-term trends that are modifying economic regulation, in particular in transport. So I'm going to do something quite simple, and I will try to keep it short, to share with you some of these deep trends that we are identifying. So before, just a little bit of history. Transport is, first of all, about infrastructure. And when we all started, and I have this map of Italy, 1860. So you could see that there were some pieces of rail infrastructure. But at the beginning, it's not about networks. It's about pieces, disconnected, constructed even by different entities, companies, public authorities. So it has been basically a century and a half in Europe to build national networks out of these segments of infrastructure. And it has been a long, very long exercise that right now, only for, I would say, 30 years, 40 maybe, we are replicating at the European level. So we are trying to build a European network on top of the national networks, on top of fragmented infrastructure. This is the big vision from the European Union. So it's been about cross-border segments, trans-European networks. I'm a strong believer in the map, in the vision. This is the vision. This is invest in the vision. This is the trans-European network. So it's cross-border segments, it's interoperability, it's cohesion funds to complement these countries where the network is weaker. And I always like to introduce this a little bit of a provocative statement. In infrastructure, in networks, 1 + 1 doesn't add 2. It adds more. It's the power of network effects. And this is a very privileged audience. I don't need to explain the power of network effects. So this is at the level of infrastructure what we've been doing. But at the end, if you really want to create a network, it's not only about the infrastructure, it's on the services on top of the infrastructure. You want to create a coherent system that works together nicely. And if we look the aim of this, the construction of this European network, it's about overcoming the national networks. But the way to do it has been a little bit paradoxical, because in reality, if we look to many of the transport modes, but I would say in particular railways, the way to build the European network somehow has been to introduce even more fragmentation, because we had very solidified national systems, vertically integrated railway companies. Everything was quite integrated. But the way to build a European network has been to disintegrate these national systems. So we have introduced vertical separation. We have vertically fragmented the transport systems. We have differentiated, and this is a very traditional approach, the service layer on top of the infrastructure layer. Railways is a very good example, but it happened pretty much in all the transport modes, airports, airlines, ports, shipping companies. It happens in electricity, etc. But even more interesting, if you think about it, competition has been about introducing horizontal fragmentation. We used to have monopolies in many of the transport modes. Now we have competition, which brings a lot of benefits, but somehow it's also creating fragmentation. And then we have the ultimate fragmentation in transport, is that we have all these silos, these different transport modes, which historically have been pretty much ignoring each other. So basically, over the last 30 years, we have built an extremely fragmented system, even somehow more fragmented than before. And so far, we have not really managed to introduce new tools to introduce coordination in all these fragmented systems. So if you think about all the regulatory frameworks that we have in railways, in aviation, in the maritime, basically we are relying on two different tools. On the one hand is the market. I mean, the market will choose the winners, the services, the timetables in theory. And then we have regulation to focus in the relationship between layer 1 and layer 2. So we have these tools, a little bit of regulation and a little bit of market approach. But my feeling is that probably it has not been enough to coordinate all these different fragmented systems. And if you think about it, today we've been talking about this, a lot of pre-planning in railways. Professor Macario was also talking about the strategic planning. This idea that we need to plan a little bit more, at the end of the day, is to put the pieces together. And if you think at multimodal level, it's even more of it. I mean, you need better coordination rules. So how is it happening? And this is something, again, a trend that we are identifying. We had a project a few years ago to work on digitalization of infrastructures, not only transport, energy, telecoms, all different types of infrastructure. And what came again and again is that digitalization, digital technologies empower infrastructure managers to manage the infrastructure more actively. And actually, this is a concept that comes mostly from electricity. You can dynamically manage your infrastructure, your network, when you have all this information. You can introduce a lot of dynamic pricing that's very powerful in highways, for instance. We've been talking about strategic planning in railways, port calling in maritime, more flexible ATM in aviation. So you see all these examples of technology empowering the infrastructure manager to become somehow the integrator of these fragmented systems. But then very often these infrastructure managers are monopolists or are under very limited competition. So I would say that this is the deep trend that we identify, technology empowering infrastructure managers, but then you need a regulatory response to it. At the end of the day, it's a monopolist that is getting a more active role in the management of the infrastructure. So you need to develop tools to control this new active infrastructure manager, power for the infrastructure manager. So it's a lot about better cross-border collaboration, better information, data for the regulator to be able to follow what is happening in the market. And at the end of the day, I would say it's for a more dynamic regulation. So the reality in the market, it's getting more complex because the infrastructure managers are becoming more dynamic on how they manage their infrastructure. So that would be the first kind of big idea. We will see more and more active infrastructure management. The infrastructure managers getting more involved in the, for instance, just an example that I think just building timetables in railways. That's new, having an infrastructure manager building timetables. I think it's a good example of what the trend we see and the need of control. And then in parallel, and this is my last slide, in parallel we see the opposite trend. And at the end of the day, there is kind of a vacuum of coordination. We have all these very fragmented pieces, and there is an order backward. Someone has to take that role. So first trend is the infrastructure manager taking that role. But there is a second trend, which is having digital platforms taking that coordination role. And I'm building a little bit on Professor Macario's presentation. So you have now somehow a new layer. It's not only infrastructure, it's not transport services, it's the data layer. And you have these digital platforms that somehow have the ambition to take this coordinating role. They have all the information, they have the visibility, they work across transport modes, they work with different services providers. It's what they have this God's eye. They see through these data exchanges what is happening. And definitely they have the ambition to coordinate the markets. And just to be very short, definitely, yeah, they will have over time the ambition to define the timetables. So you see this somehow conflict in this vacuum. Who is going to fill up this vacuum? Who is going to take this coordinating role? Will it be the infrastructure managers, or will it be these digital platforms working on the digital layer? And what should be the regulatory reaction to these new evolutions? How to regulate transport platforms? Professor Macario was starting to introduce this issue. This is something fundamentally different, but not quite. Because at the end, if you go to all the new frontier in regulation, digital regulation, if you look to the regulations that have been adopted by the European Union, the Digital Markets Act, the Digital Service Act, it's all about network effects. And who knows better than this crowd how to regulate network effects? It's the traditional regulators working in the industries that know how to regulate network effects. So it's not so different. And at the end of the day, if you look to the Digital Market Act, for instance, you will see again, it's about access regulation. But it's not the same access regulation we are used to. If you look to the Digital Market Act, what you will see is this FRAN regulation, fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory. It sounds familiar to probably all of us, this access regulation, non-discrimination, but the F is the difference, fairness. I don't think we are very used to work in fairness terms. We are used to non-discrimination, cost orientation, econometric models, but our econometric models do not capture fairness. Well, one of the trends that we see is that if you look to analysis, frontier economics, this is what they are focusing on. How to build models, economic models, to capture fairness in the vertical relationships between the digital platforms and the entities that are being coordinated. And this is not specific to transport. This is the regulation for Amazon. This is the regulation for Facebook. These vertical regulations, platforms coordinating the underlying physical reality. And how to regulate this fairness, the business, how to distribute the value created by the network effects. That's the Digital Markets Act, and that's what we see more and more, even from economic perspective, how to capture this distribution of value created by the network effects created by the platforms. And then I would say the ultimate frontier, public service obligations on platforms. If we really see, we will see how it evolves, that digital platforms end up coordinating at least some segments of the transport sector, then we might want to shift some public service obligations from the service providers to the platforms. And just one final comment. So you see, we see two different trends. We see the infrastructure managers becoming more active, coordinators. We see the digital platforms aiming to become coordinators. And what about the layer 2, the service providers? They are somehow being squeezed, and they are the entities that are put at risk. They are in competition, they are eroding margins due to competition, they have this vertical relationship, access regulation with infrastructure managers that I would have to say that maybe are not as effectively regulated. I mean, it's difficult to regulate these monopolies. And then they have the pressure from the platforms. So it's probably the weakest link in this vertical segmentation of the industry. So I will stop here and will not take more time. Thank you.
Grazie. Chiedo solo un piccolo approfondimento sul tema che hai già toccato in parte della condivisione dei dati, data sharing, in questo percorso di digitalizzazione nella regolazione dei trasporti. Data sharing che è una necessità ma è chiaramente anche una criticità.
Sì, sicuramente in the regulation of this vertical relationship between layer 2 and layer 3, of course, it's the data layer. So the data layer, the access regulation is pretty much about data access regulation. And then what I would say is we cannot analyze this access regulation, strictly speaking, as a transport regulation. And we should know that because at the European level, we already have rules that set the general framework for the regulation of this relationship. So in terms of data sharing obligations, we have the Data Governance Act, and even more in particular, we have the Data Act. The Data Act that is being adopted in these weeks. In the Data Act, there is a general framework on the obligations on data sharing. And you will see how, and it's about FRAN. It's about fair, reasonable, non-discriminatory, but I underline the F, the fair, and how to calculate that F. So we have a general framework that even defines how to solve disputes. And that framework is more dynamic. It's not so much about regulators, rule-making by regulators, which is what we are used to in transport, in electricity, in transport. There is a huge information asymmetry, so it's kind of the burden of proof in the definition of the obligation is kind of transferred to the regulated industry. And it's for the entities, so the service providers and the platforms, to negotiate access conditions and develop a governance framework to solve the disputes, which might not be a regulator setting the conditions. That's pretty much the framework in the Data Act, by kind of a private settlement arbitration inspired by the FRAN conditions as they are developed in patents, standard patents. That's the origin. So it's familiar to us, but it has a kind of different origin. And then the famous mobility, MDMS regulation, the regulation that the European Commission was preparing to regulate this kind of data access and data sharing. It's just the specific framework in development of the Data Act. And then defining this fairness in the distribution of value, that's the difficulty. And that's what basically the Commission could not do. And it's too easy to say, let's just share all the data, let's impose an obligation. That's not very fair in the distribution of value. And that was the difficulty. I think there is a point. Transport service providers want a balanced relationship with the platforms. So some kind of obligations, particularly for service providers with market power, probably yes, but a full obligation to disclose everything probably is not a good idea. And we need a lot of thinking and good economic models to capture this distribution of value, this fair distribution of value.
Grazie. Bene, passiamo all'ultimo speaker di questo panel, il professor Thanos Pallis dell'Università del Pireo, che ha una vasta esperienza internazionale nel mondo marittimo e dei trasporti, ha lavorato per l'UNCTAD, per l'Ox, per la Banca Mondiale, è stato segretario generale di MedCruise, è co-coordinatore anche lui dell'advisory board dell'Autorità ed è stato per 2 mandati anche presidente mondiale degli economisti marittimi. A lui chiediamo chiaramente una riflessione importante sulla regolazione del mondo portuale e in particolare sulle concessioni. E il titolo, lo vediamo, è già parecchio impegnativo. Diciamo. Prego, Thanos.
Thank you, Francesco. I know that I have a difficult task. I'm probably the speaker that you wish had not been included in the program because he's the last one. And also I know that I have to deliver a speech at 1:32 when the session was supposed to close at 1:30. And the worst thing is that academics make their living by presenting more and more slides until the audience die by presentation. But so that's a very difficult task. I will try to go a bit limited, but I cannot promise a lot. the only suggestion is that let's go maritime, because we have not gone really maritime for the best part of this of today's meeting. And I would say that it's vital, with all respect to all different modes, but okay, we can transport goods, but goods have to arrive to our ports or have to go to our ports and keep going, because we need the integration of the infrastructure that has been discussed before by Juan. We'll go maritime. Before going maritime, I have to say that there is an omission on this slide. I also have the honor to be a member of the advisory board of ART, and I would like to congratulate the ART for the work that they are doing. Our humble contribution is still ongoing, and I would like also to thank them for giving the opportunity to be here with you to discuss things together. We're going to talk a bit about ports, and the whole idea is to go towards a global perspective, because we have a few things to resolve in terms of deregulatory initiatives or regulatory initiatives. You choose the term because then we have a lot of discussion. Here I would like to set the setting, and here what we really have is one mechanism which applies widely in the industry. It's driven quite a lot by concessions. The way that the industry, especially in Italy now, next year, Italy will celebrate, perhaps it's a strong term, but yes, it is the reality to my perspective, 30 years since the law of 1994 that introduced the idea or prepared the ground for developing concessions. So that's a way that the industry evolves. And now we are reaching a point where in the port sector, we are going to have many ports or port system authorities, as called here in Italy, or port network authorities, that they will have to renegotiate the concessions. They will have to go back and revisit what's going on. And there are plenty of decisions to be made. There are plenty of things that need to be decided at the various stages of the process. What's my ambition here is to present 4 different things, because here we don't talk about an industry, we talk about an ecosystem, and that's the difficulty. It's beyond one single mode or beyond a single infrastructure. We talk about an ecosystem which is in transition in many different ways. I'll focus on 4 of them. One is more about market structures. The second is about the vertical integration, which is ongoing and looks like a definitional change in the industry. And then 2 things that have crossed all the other modes. The first one is the data sharing, which is quite important. And the 4th one is the idea of this environmental transition, the decarbonization of shipping, and all things that are evolving. Okay, some from the news. How the industry develops, a fundamental thing. We have fewer operators providing services, and that's from the shipping side, with bigger vessels. We have a push towards transformation of infrastructure, so the push is coming, and we have also the oligopoly that is becoming an even bigger oligopoly. That's from UNCTAD's recent release of the trends in the sector. So we have fewer operators. Not only do we have fewer operators, but we have a transition which is going to be faced by the ports of Italy and all European ports, I would say, and beyond. And this is the fact that we have an increasing concentration in the shipping industry. Why do we care? We care because these are the investors in the ports. These are the ones that are here, and they dominate the evolution of the ports. These cash-rich carriers are the ones that are really active. All reports suggest that we have this activity intensifying. These are the ones that, along with global terminal operators, I will not stay long with that because we don't have many major changes there. They control 80%, 80, of the operations in the European market. And that's really critical. And it is critical because post-COVID, we have, and I will not go in details, although they are here somewhere in the presentation, we have mergers and acquisitions that are ongoing. We have many cases of greenfield projects, and we have a clear preference, and this is the bottom line, a clear preference for established markets and for projects of scale. Projects of scale, perhaps a port system authority is a project of scale, and this is something to be monitored. So that's the background, and I will go a bit further here, because I want to add something more. The second issue is this vertical integration. And vertical integration is quite important. We see all the major carriers that become the terminal operators, and we see this vertical integration expanding. We can go and we could say a lot about this vertical integration. I will just say a couple of things more, because this is a game changer as well. We go and we see something that has happened. The integration of supply chains, but where we had competition in many respects because the market was a bit contestable or really contestable. That's for economists to discuss the term and so on, but entry-exit was there. Now we see the entry minimized in few companies and a few places. So there are critical decisions in the evolution. We need to focus on how ports integrate with inland ports and logistic zones, and how foreign trade zones develop around ports. I was 2 weeks ago in a conference of the International Association of Ports and Harbors, and there was a debate. Port of Barcelona, for instance, or Port of Marseille, they have developed, together with other actors, they have developed logistic zones, they have developed free trade zones, and there they had the control as port authorities, as port system authorities, as we would say here in Italy, and now they feel the pressure from big players who every other day they come forward when the hinterland is overlapping between different ports, and ports between them are now in a different type of competition. Some regulation is needed, so otherwise we are going to cannibalize the market by cross-port competition and the push of the one to the other just to go further. So things are not really easy. There are things to discuss here. It's about regulating land use. It's about regulating about who invests, about the financial incentives, the contestability of the markets, and also the rules that govern this whole game. We have costs, we have issues of capacity, we have issues of supply management and access, which are worth revisiting given the trends in the industry. I would go a bit further. I would just to give you an example of what happened in the last 2 months, only 2 major changes, 2 major moves. Whether you go south in Europe, whether you go north to Europe, is it what I'm saying, just another academic saying a couple of things? No, you go to what's happening in the industry, and you see there that we have a trend which is very, very clear. I mean, this vertical integration is ongoing. Of course, you know the names here, you know some more than others, but that's the case that happens north and south. Is there a concern for Italy? One would say that the market in Italy is, because we are in Italian context here, it's quite safe because we don't have a concentration. I played a bit with the numbers by Drury, are not obviously collected by Drury and some other reports. That's the Italian market. If you go to the Italian market, that's the distribution of the Italian market. And one might say, okay, we are a bit safe. How safe are we? How safe? But how safe are we as a market when we see this aggressiveness and see this appetite by the global terminal operators? I focused a bit on shipping lines because the vertical integration is on extent, but then after that you have terminal operators. Again, in this market, you need to take care because the expansion of the terminals, the need for terminal expansion is there. Given the recovery from COVID, given the resilience of the sector throughout the COVID, and how we have developed global trade, the fact is that we need, and there are things here to address. We need to address both financial issues in an environment where we need, we demand committed operators, and also we need to generate, we have interest for investment by global actors. This is something that needs to happen. And I will just focus on 2, let's say, game changers perhaps because they happened. We had a system where we know how things were operating. In the maritime world, we have a market which is going to affect definitely ports. It's the recent decision of the European Commission to not give anymore the block exemption to the shipping alliances. Shipping companies operating alliances, and these alliances were mostly based on the idea that we have a particular market structure. Now we have the demolition of alliances. The second thing that I would like to focus on is we have plenty of foreign direct investments. This has gone from a local issue to a European issue at least. Very recently, the European Parliament published a report, commissioned a report. They are preparing their own report. It's under discussion. We have foreign direct investments in ports. That's quite critical. It's quite critical because there is a potential of leveraging, of geopolitical leveraging of the home country of the state-owned enterprises that invest in the country where they invest. We have risks that are associated, and I will focus, they can do that, this leverage, either by changing the supply chains. They are not only investors in ports, but they are also investors who have the capacity to change the connectivity of different countries. And more than that, they can extract leverage by by non-maritime related issues, and this is data sharing. I will return to that. The importance is quite, these investments are quite important. Here we focus on the Chinese, but there are, next to them, there are Abu Dhabi ports, the DB Gord, and then we have Singapore Port Authority, all of them sovereign funds. Investments are not coming from private investors, they are coming from sovereign funds, and this is quite important from a regulatory perspective. I would say this is why even a minority, earlier this year, a minority share in the smallest terminal of a big port, which is Hamburg, became a major issue between the state and the investor. It's because this geopolitical leverage potential is there. Given this, that was just to give, it's the smallest terminal, a minority share in the smallest terminal. That goes to the third, I have 2 more slides in the conclusion. That give us the background to the third dimension, which is data sharing. Ports develop based on data sharing. There was a reference by one earlier on Amazon. Amazon is a shipping player, and very, very soon they will be a port player. They will seek for terminals to operate because their footprint increased since 2020 by 40%, and now they go to shipping, and now they have said that ports are the second thing in this vertical integration that Amazon wants to achieve. Imagine Amazon operating the port of Torino, I would say, just to be neutral and not name any other port in Italy, obviously for safe reasons, so I go the safe side. The point is that because of that, I mean, we have issues with foreign investors. Exclude the foreign investors, there are different port community systems. The new word in the ports is the data sharing among the different actors. Port community systems, I will also go back to this International Association of Ports and Harbors conference that happened in Asia 2 weeks ago. The major theme was data and energy. That's to tell you about the penultimate slide that I have. The point is that we have an industry which needs to share data, and we have foreign investors, and we also need trust leadership within these port community systems, and that means that the role of port authorities is becoming even more important now that we go towards a revisiting of the concessioning process. Last but not least, they say, but it's seriously not least, because energy might be the word of the last decade. Here I am, someone who presents this slide, and I dare to present this slide because 10 years ago, obviously, the gray hairs help. I wouldn't believe that energy would turn a major issue to ports. I was saying that, okay, this is another way to present something innovative, somebody has to say has something clever, let's talk about energy. No, it's not anymore like that. I was the worst believer of this transition, but this is happening, and there are following decisions on decarbonization of shipping. It's more and more important that we secure investments for our ports in order to participate in this energy transition. We have public partnerships, private partnerships. We need to take care of these things, because otherwise we are going to lose connectivity, we are going to lose trade, we are going to lose the competitiveness of the ports. There are plenty of issues. We don't know what it's all about, but we need to take care beforehand in order to be able to know what's going on with the industry and how these multiple transformations related to energy that you see on the left side are utilized. So this, that we saw that before, we need to revisit the criteria, when we introduce the concessions, and then there are two things we need to monitor the outcome of the process and so on. These are three core things. I try to provide the background for these three areas of that it's worth by a regulatory authority to revisit, and in addition, add the environmental dimension. At the various stages, the environmental with a broader sense, environmental which relates to the energy transition and so on. So that's the idea. Greening port concessions, it's something which it's not another, let's say, ideologically captured idea about the need, how good the environment is, etc. It's bare necessity, I would say, and this is something that needs to happen. Okay, I took long, but I said you from the outset, that's how academics are making their living, present too many presentations. That's these were my thoughts about how we should rethinking the regulatory process or the regulatory process. It's a quest for rethinking the regulatory process. It's about two needs in essence, and I would conclude with these two sentences. One of them is about strong port authorities, which are the honest brokers in the environment that emerges. The infrastructure managers that were discussed earlier this morning are going from big to bigger and concentrate, and we have an oligopoly there. And the second thing relates to the need to maintain the contestability of the market, the potential of companies going into the markets. We did that in the 90s, we did that in the beginning of 2000s in Europe, but also in other places of the world. This is questionable right now. Someone has to do that. Of course, I leave another question open, which is a bit sensitive. Who should do that, given the interinstitutional, let's say, discussions of which is the better suited actor to do these things? Thank you very much. Apologies for going long.
Grazie. Grazie Thanos. Siamo un po' in ritardo, quindi faccio una domanda proprio da un minuto. 1 minute. I porti sono competitivi se sono inseriti in supply chain efficienti ed affidabili. Quindi ci vuole una regolazione integrata tra modi di trasporto o comunque essere consapevoli di questa complessità. Secondo te la regolazione come può aiutare in questo dialogo tra il porto e il suo mercato, quindi i mercati terrestri?
If I understood well, the question is the need to link. It's the need to link what's happening in ports with the land side. I mean, there is a difficulty there, which, okay, we have 1 minute. Okay, there is a difficulty because we don't really know where the port ends, given the investments that take place land side. But I think that we definitely need to integrate different regulations regarding different modes. And that, if I understood well the question, the case is that you cannot go and end what you have foreseen in a concessions process with what happens in the port, but you need to take into the concession process the further activities that will be eventually developed by others. But you cannot do that modally. You cannot go to one mode again. You need to integrate that with the other modes. Otherwise, it's how ports were introduced in the trans-European network system. In the beginning, we did not have ports as part of the trans-European network system, but eventually everybody realized that developing the railroads was not enough without integrating parts of the port system. And we started integrating parts in the European regulations. Now we have to do the other thing. We have to expand the ports regulations and integrate things from the landside modes.
Grazie. Grazie a tutti per la presentazione e grazie a voi per averci seguito. Lasciamo la parola al Presidente.
Carlos, actually, I am the last one. So I took notes I have 25 pages now. I would like to present in details. Carla is going to faint. Okay. No. Okay. Grazie veramente a tutti. Sarò brevissimo perché abbiamo sforato i tempi, però ne valsa la pena perché le tematiche che abbiamo trattato oggi sono veramente interessanti. Abbiamo assistito ai lavori di 2 panel, lasciatemi dire, ad altissimo livello. Mi sarebbe veramente piaciuto adesso partire magari con degli approfondimenti, mi sono segnato veramente tanti punti di riflessione, questi li teniamo da parte e speriamo quindi di organizzare a breve magari un workshop, un altro meeting nel quale approfondire tutti questi aspetti. Abbiamo visto che nel primo panel c'è stata una interessantissima, almeno per me, panoramica di competenze, no, che i nostri colleghi ed amici regolatori europei hanno con le varie differenziazioni. Quindi anche questo è un aspetto molto interessante. Qualcuno dei miei collaboratori ha visto come per esempio il regolatore inglese, no, si occupa anche di safety, quindi di sicurezza, che era una delle idee che avevo avuto anch'io per l'autorità, poi subito immediatamente bocciate dai miei regolatori. Però in realtà sono delle analisi, delle riflessioni, dei ragionamenti che sicuramente vanno fatti per cogliere tutte le evoluzioni che il mondo dei trasporti e il grande dinamismo e tutte le evoluzioni che il mondo dei trasporti ci presenta quotidianamente. In questo secondo panel invece abbiamo assistito a degli approfondimenti estremamente interessanti di tematiche più ben precise, più circoscritte, quindi poi mi auguro insomma, che anche le presentazioni poi in autorità rimangano, perché anche lì ci sono degli spunti di riflessione molto interessanti. Un'esigenza secondo me comune, anche discutendo e parlando con i miei colleghi durante il coffee break, è quella che questi momenti per noi regolatori devono diventare più frequenti. Abbiamo sicuramente l'esigenza e la necessità di confrontarci. Il mondo, come dicevo prima, il mondo non solo dei trasporti ma della regolazione dei servizi di pubblica utilità è un mondo che si sta evolvendo con altissima velocità e quindi ritengo che sia veramente essenziale incontrarci, parlarci, discutere, troveremo degli altri modi, quindi sono contentissimo che oggi siamo riusciti a farlo. Probabilmente abbiamo bisogno anche, e lo dico a Luisa, sono delle riflessioni che ogni tanto facciamo, forse c'è bisogno di un network di regolatori europei, no, che si occupi di tutti i settori dei trasporti nel nostro ambito, ma in generale di regolazione economica, quindi europea. Forse c'è bisogno, sentiamo almeno noi questa forte necessità. Avevo preso veramente degli spunti, mi ero segnato alcuni degli interventi che mi avevano colpito in particolar modo, ve li risparmio vista l'ora. Cito solamente la dottoressa Garofalo quando sottolineava che la Commissione è sicuramente un'alleata di noi regolatori, assolutamente sì, noi questo fatto lo percepiamo e per noi è estremamente importante, anche perché quella indipendenza che è essenziale, quindi per noi regolatori, ahimè non è così forte come le diceva, anche per chi questa indipendenza ce l'ha, insomma, in maniera almeno più solida rispetto ad altri. Un caso su tutti, cito proprio l'Autorità di regolazione dei trasporti italiana. Come saprete, col decreto asset di agosto il mondo dell'autotrasporto è stato tolto da compiti, no, di regolazione, quindi è stata tolta dall'alveo dell'Autorità di regolazione dei trasporti. Quindi questi tentativi di indebolire quindi l'autorità e di ridurre la nostra autonomia e la nostra indipendenza, ahimè, sono quotidiani, quindi per noi la certezza di avere la Commissione al nostro fianco è veramente una garanzia ed è un fattore di grandissima importanza. Io mi fermo qui, insomma, vedo qualcuno in crisi ipoglicemica, quindi ringrazio veramente tutti per aver partecipato oggi a questa giornata e quindi adesso ci muoviamo, abbiamo un light lunch, quindi grazie ancora a tutti voi.